Hello, 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 hello. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? It is late night, but we're all stuck home, working from home, staying home. Perhaps some of us are unemployed, a lot of us probably. We are all stuck at home, self quarantined with coronavirus. So why not just hop on YouTube on Monday evening and check in with our little community, see how folks are doing. Wow. Wow, folks, so much that we can talk about. There's been a huge drop on the oil markets. There have been some other international events that I would like to get to. Plenty that we can discuss. I see folks are coming on in. Plenty that we can talk about. But folks, why don't I just get down to business? Why don't I just get down to business? Folks, China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. People say China never warned the United States about this. I'm sorry. I tend to remember them warning us quite a bit. I tend to remember how they locked down their population. And U.S. media called them authoritarian. How dare they do that? Oh, this is authoritarianism. How dare they lock down? These are extreme measures. Oh, we would never do that here in America. Look what China is doing, this evil authoritarianism. They warned people about it. They let people know about it. And we didn't listen to them. And not only did we not listen to them, we're not listening to them now. There are people who want life to get back to normal right now. Right? I mean, this is unbelievable. The fact that they have got people convinced. I kid you not, they got people convinced somehow this is a bioweapon from China. You want to talk about a conspiracy theory, right? Why would China unleash a disease that would kill a lot of its own population, bring its own economy to the worst it has ever been since the 1978 reform and opening up? Why would they do that to themselves just to see it spread around the world? That doesn't make any sense. Anti-China hysteria is reaching new levels. Now, folks, we remember 1949, you had the Chinese Revolution, where Mao Zedong declared 1/4 of humanity has stood up. And when that revolution happened, in the United States, McCarthyism was already in full swing. And when that happened, you had the rallying cry of McCarthyism. McCarthyism went into a new phase. First, McCarthyism was the Democrats cleaning their own camp. It was Roman Catholic Democrats, the urban political machines, the Kennedy family, going after the Communist Party, going after the Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party, going after figures like Henry Wallace and such, pushing them out of the Democratic Party, Alger Hiss. McCarthyism entered a new phase in 1949. And suddenly, it was no longer was it simply Democrats cleaning out their own house. Suddenly, McCarthyism became Republicans accusing Democrats of being soft on China. And what was their rallying cry? What did they say? What was the rallying cry of McCarthyism as it entered this new dangerous stage in 1949? It was, who lost China? Who lost China? That was the rallying cry of McCarthyism as it escalated. And they blamed the Democratic Party, they blamed Harry Truman for, quote, losing China. That was the launching. And they talk about the China lobby. That's some old terminology. But the far right wing, the fanatical anti-communists, they called them the China lobby. And these were folks that were obsessed with the People's Republic of China, with hating the People's Republic of China. There was a movie that was very popular, The Manchurian Candidate. I don't know if folks have heard of it. It was a novel first, and then they made it into a movie. And it was about how China has magical brainwashing power. And there's a guy who's, a politician in the United States, and if you show him a card, he suddenly gets programmed by the Chinese communists, and he must obey them and do whatever they said. The hysteria in the United States about brainwashing, right? Brainwashing, all that took off, right? And that McCarthyism, who lost China? We are digging up old fossils from the American political graveyard, from the American political boneyard of stupidity, right? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. China is not responsible for the failures of American capitalism. It is not China's fault that our government didn't take this seriously. China was warning the world. It is not the fault of the World Health Organization that we have a disastrous healthcare system in the United States. In fact, many international bodies have criticized the American healthcare system for the way it operates, for the fact that people are in debt for the rest of their lives if they have a major surgery, if they get sick. People are very critical of the American healthcare system. International bodies have long been critical of the fact that poverty increases your chances of getting ill in the United States, that life expectancy in the United States is very much linked to income. It's not the fault of the World Health Organization. It's not the fault of the People's Republic of China. The failures that we are seeing, the disaster in the United States, with our economy in shambles, with a shortage of necessary supplies, with ventilators not in supply, with the United States begging for help from countries like Russia and China, and all of this is not the fault of the People's Republic of China. This is the fault of the fact that we have a system here in the United States where profits come before people, where greed runs rampant, and where the economy is organized to serve the private profits of a small group of owners who don't give a flying F about you and are just looking for their bottom line. And that's why, mind you, these protests are taking place. I wanted to touch on this. So now we've got the coronavirus pandemic, and it's very, very bad for the economy. People are not working. People don't have money. And there's a divide among the American bourgeoisie. All right? Whenever there's a pandemic, whenever there's a disaster that breaks out, whenever that happens, it tends to sweep away certain people and allow certain other people in the marketplace to rise to the top, right? Walmart is doing great right now. Walmart is doing phenomenally right now, right? Walmart stores are open because they're deemed necessary. They've got food, they've got medicine. But Walmart, what do they have? They've got nails, they've got, hardware, supplies, they've got some basic stuff. So Walmart's doing great. Do you know who's suffering like crazy? Home Depot. Home Depot is getting their ass kicked right now. Home Depot stores are being nailed to the wall. Bernie Marcus, who is a billionaire, big supporter of Trump, he is getting killed right now. But the Walton family that owns Walmart, Sam Walton got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from George Herbert Walker Bush. The Walmart pioneers of low wages, union busting, psychological profiles on their employees, making people work off the clock, treating people like garbage, not paying people. You've heard the horror stories of Walmart. Walmart is speeding ahead right now because they're open. Home Depot, another big box store, another wealthy billionaire family, another corrupt American oligarch operation. They're getting their ass kicked right now, right? So if you are Walmart, you think that public health means that this ought to go on for maybe another 4 months or maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Just got to keep this going. Just public health, guys. And if you're Home Depot, you got to turn it on now. Open up now. We want to work. We want to work. It's that simple. Amazon is doing great. So if you're Jeff Bezos, you're going to say, wow, well, we've got to keep this going for as long as possible. It's public health, folks. public health, just got to keep it. And if you are a local bookstore, if you're a local store that's closed, that has to sell supplies, then you are going to, of course, be saying, we want to work, we want to work. And that's exactly what's going on the oil markets right now. That's exactly what is going on the oil markets right now. Exactly what is going on the oil markets right now. Folks, I wrote a book, Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis. And I didn't exactly write it as a book. This is a speech that I gave. A speech that I gave in Brazil. I spoke to 5,000 trade unionists in Brazil at a gathering of the Trade Union Center of Brazil, the CSB. I spoke to them. They're affiliated with the World Federation of Trade Unions, which is a gathering of revolutionary, democratic, and anti-imperialist trade unions around the world. The Brazil affiliate is called CSB. They invited me there in 2016 to give a speech about the oil markets. And we have seen the oil markets plummet. Negative prices. Negative prices. What does that mean? That means they pay you. You buy it, you take it, and they pay you. Because at this point, they don't have any place to store it, right? This is dramatic. The oil prices have plummeted. May oil contracts, right? Oil futures. Forget it. Forget it. What's going on here? Well, there's a number of things going on here, but first things first, nobody's flying anywhere. International travel, forget it. So, airplanes, not buying oil. Nobody's driving anywhere, right? I mean, barely anyone is going to go to places. People can't go to work. People, so they're not buying gas, right? People aren't factories. People aren't going in to produce products, right? Plastic. Yeah. The oil markets are not doing too well. Not doing too well. Not doing too well. And just like Walmart is doing great, just like Amazon is doing great, the big four super major oil companies, the folks that dominate the oil market, right? ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, and Shell Oil, right? Now, if you put them together with Total, the French corporation, that you've got 80% of the world's oil production. 80% is under their dominion, right? So this is not a small dominion. The super majors, the four super majors plus France's Total, that's 80% of the world's oil production. You have got major monopolies. And they see this as an opportunity to have their competitors go under. That's what they're seeing. They are in for the kill right now. The fracking companies, right? They're done. The fracking companies are done. They were already suffering. They were already bleeding. They were already crying out in pain under Barack Obama when it went down to like $27 per barrel. When people talk about $10 a barrel now, $12 a barrel, negative prices like we saw today, this is killing them. Those fracking companies that fund YouTube channels like PragerU, that promote the work of Dinesh D'Souza, that pay for the speaking tours of Charlie Kirk, they are getting killed. They are getting killed. They're getting pummeled. The fracking companies are crying out in pain. And the big four super majors, sure, they're losing profits, they're losing money, but their hope is that this will lead to cementing their monopoly, eliminating competition. That's their hope. And what will then happen? And this is what people are kind of forgetting here. If oil prices are getting this low, I mean, they're just plummeting, right? It was bad when it was $27 a barrel. It was bad when it was $30 a barrel. But this is unbelievable, right? It costs at least $14 per barrel to frack, right? So they're making nothing. They're just losing money nonstop. And they're already drilling on credit. Wall Street banks have loaned them so much. The fracking industry, forget it. So, what's going to happen? Well, folks, when the economy starts to come back to life, the oil prices are not just going to get high. They're going to get very high. That is my prediction. That is my prediction, that when the economy starts to come back to life, we are going to see very, very high oil prices. Why? Because a monopoly will have been cemented, right? And they will be, when someone's got a monopoly, what do? The price, the price goes up. People talk about the old Walmart scheme. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but Walmart comes into a town, and there's a couple local hardware stores and a local supermarket. So what does Walmart do? Well, it's got its savings. So it drives the prices at Walmart down as low as it possibly can go. And it puts all the local stores out of business. And then once those local stores are out of business, what does Walmart do? Jack the price up. Why? Because there's no one else to buy from. What happened? What happened? If you look at the Bush years, George W. Bush, he was consistently doing everything possible to drive the oil price as high as he possibly could. Right? Under George W. Bush, you saw some of the highest oil prices in history. $120 a barrel. It was huge. Right? And people didn't understand it. They said, I thought we invaded Iraq to get their oil. So why is it costing so much? Well, because we just blew up and destroyed a major oil-producing state. Right? After the bombing of Libya, right? A major oil-producing country. Libya's oil production was blown to bits. So there was less supply. So demand increased and the price went up. Right? The entire Bush administration, from the sanctions on Russia, Georgia, you'll remember, attacked South Ossetia. Russia responded, fought back against Georgia. USA put sanctions on Russia. Price went up. Sanctions on Iran. Sanctions were imposed on Iran over allegations they had a nuclear program. Prices of oil went up. Right? Oil prices, I'll tell you. And then it was after Libya. Suddenly, with these fracking companies that were funding the Tea Party, funding Republican extremism, and the drilling companies, let's not forget the deep sea drilling companies, right? After the BP oil spill and those drillers, they were not happy. And so Obama and the big four super majors, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the ultra rich, they sat down and they drove that oil price down. The Saudis were the ones who did it. Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, I quote him in this book. I quote him. Michael Reagan said that this was the exact same strategy the United States used against the Soviet Union in the 1980s. When the Soviet Union began to transition under Gorbachev to being an oil exporting country, right? The Soviet Union had huge amounts of oil. Under Gorbachev, they had the idea they would increase state revenue by selling oil to Europe. So they built huge oil pipelines to West Germany. And then the Saudis, with the help of Ronald Reagan, we now have a confession from Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, dropped the oil price so that the Soviet Union wouldn't make any profits after they invested so much in building a huge oil pipeline. Messing with the oil price, right? Sure, there are natural developments, fracking, for example. Fracking comes along, different supply, right? There are natural developments in the market. But then people try to use those developments to their advantage. And they fight over the government because they know the government can be very useful in getting these things done, right? Fox News is announcing, oh no, these fracking companies, they need government. They need government support, right? They need government support. We're seeing reports about the fact that Shake Shack, huge chain, big restaurant chain, is getting government bailout money reserved for small businesses. While actual small businesses, actual mom and pop stores, local restaurants are not getting anything. Why? Shake Shack has access to the federal government. This is what happens, right? And libertarians don't understand this. They say, well, the government should just keep its hands off. Well, in a situation like this, the government's got to help somebody. And it helps the people that are the most influential. It helps the people that have the most amount of influence, right? That seems to be the situation. And the small business owners, the fracking companies, Walmart, well, not Walmart, but Home Depot, they're desperately trying to turn the economy back on, because it's the only hope they've got. And some people are making out like bandits. $1.1 trillion. That is the value of Amazon stock right now. Look, we are looking at Amazon as a virtual monopoly. And I got to tell you folks, Amazon, why isn't it nationalized? At this point, it's just a necessary utility, right? It's an ultra monopoly, right? Now we know about the connections. We know about the connections that Amazon has. We know about the connections that Amazon has. We know about their Pentagon contracts, right? We know about the systems that they designed for the U.S. military. You can read about it. Amazon is very, very tied to the deep state, the Pentagon, the military apparatus. Trump doesn't seem to care for them very much. People talk about how he has an in with the post office, and Amazon, have a relationship, special treatment. Bezos is an Obama guy. Bezos owns the Washington Post. The Washington Post is not very favorable to Donald Trump. So people talk about political infighting. But it is a very, very interesting situation that we are in. We are seeing American capitalism completely confused, not knowing what to do, running one way, running another way, like a chicken with its head cut off. This is the situation facing our country in the middle of a pandemic, as profits are in command, as overproduction has eliminated jobs. We were already in an economic mess before this happened, and the floodgates have opened. We're all trying to figure out how we can stay afloat. I did a great interview yesterday with Sean Rosellis, talking about how he's been providing community aid. He and members of the Communist Party have been going out and helping people. A lot of things we can talk about tonight, folks. Not a lot of places to be. So why don't I do that thing where I call you out, names and locations. But before I do that, don't forget to hit the like button, hammer that like button, subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. I happen to know that at least 27% of you have not subscribed. If you are one of those 27%, now is the time to subscribe. It's important. It's very important to hit the notifications bell, because I bet most of you wouldn't have known I was about to be here. I bet almost all of you are here because of a notification. So be sure to hit that notifications bell, hit the like button. And now, as I take the last sip of my orange juice, I've got plenty of water, so don't worry, my voice won't go out. Now is the time to give me your names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Roll call. Las Vegas, Nevada. Empire, Michigan. Glen in Pittsburgh. Southern California. Boston, Massachusetts. Cincinnati, Ohio. Jenny Lynn. Galen, North Carolina. Lady Ravenhair in New Jersey. Kazume in Maryland. Cleveland. Ramiro in Los Angeles. Kinky says, you know me. Ithaca, New York. Long Island, New York. Stanley Stanlin. Troy, Los Angeles. San Diego. West Virginia. Long Island, New York. Australia. Seattle, Washington. Long Island, New York. Will Lotz. San Antonio, Sama. Joanne Johnson in Holland. Washington State, Arkansas, Traverse City, Michigan, NSW, Australia, Ohio, big fan, says Kevin Q, Tacoma, Everett, Washington, KJ Mack in Texas, Letterer Carrier and Union Stewart that went by. This is Mark from California. Pleasure to you. Vallejo, California, Jason, Winnemucca, Nevada, Brisbane, Australia, Simon Wood, LOL Sama, Big D, I say. Big D, I say. They all went by so fast. Winnipeg, Manitoba, Georgia, Milan, Italy, Aiden from the Poconos, New Haven, Connecticut, Shoreline Green Party, Herb Bryant, Harlem, Charlotte, North Carolina, Northern Michigan, Sanford, North Carolina, Glendale, California, watching from Tampa, Florida, Texas, Austin, U.S.-Mexico border, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Popey, Italy. Thanks for being here, Kevin Q says. Well, thanks to you. Den, reactionary East Texas, Toronto, Glendale, California, Shanghai, China, Van Nuys, California. I cannot wait to get out to the West Coast. Memphis, Arkansas, Switzerland, Grove, North Carolina. I always love to do this. It's always fun to know who's here, right? It's always fun to know who's watching with you. Ken in Connecticut. A lot of Californians. Yes, I want to get out to the West Coast. I really want to get out to the West Coast. There's something about the West Coast I like. Van Nuys, California. Popey, Italy. New Zealand, Utah. Wow, folks, if you haven't tweeted this out and brought people on board, please do so. Dallas, Texas. And folks, I do appreciate super chats. If anyone super chats me, I will give you some kind of response. It may not be the response you want, but I do appreciate super chats. So if you super chat me, I will super answer you. It may not be super in your opinion, but it will be super in my opinion. People are asking about Kim Jong-un. Well, I would like to let people know that fake news about North Korea is extremely common. Fake news about North Korea is extremely common. We don't really know what's going on. You'll remember that when Kim Jong-il died, U.S. media was furious that they didn't know about it until North Korea officially announced it. Well, that was probably a good thing, right? Kim Jong-il died, and U.S. media had no idea until North Korea came forward and made the formal announcement that Kim Jong-il had actually died. And people are saying, oh, that shows, oh, that's unbelievable. That just, no, I mean, it shows that they have control of the information that gets in and out of their country. And Kim Jong-un, is it possible his health isn't doing well? Sure. Is this a rumor, perhaps, to distract from the fact that they're defeating coronavirus so well and they've got such a low infection rate? Perhaps. Is this a rumor made up by somebody? Sure. You know, folks, this is something that I care about a lot. I've followed this stuff for a while. You know, there's a great professor, one of the most well-respected Korea scholars in the United States. His name is Bruce Cummings, and he wrote North Korea, Another Country, very good book. He wrote a book called Korea's Place in the Sun, also a very good book. And I had the pleasure of meeting him when I was in college. He spoke at my university. I emailed him and told him I was a fan, and we actually, you know, I had the pleasure of interacting with him, and it was great. And Bruce Cummings, I remember Bruce Cummings, and, you know, one of the things that came up during his lecture, that frequently comes up on his lecture, all right, I've got a super chat about the 5G. One of the things that frequently comes up in his lectures is people will say, is it true that Kim Jong-il has the world's largest collection of pornography? Is it true that Kim Jong-il claims he invented the hamburger? Is it true that Kim Jong-il, has 1,000 gajillion prostitutes? And he will always say that he frequently gets questions about this from ABC News, from Fox, from others. And he says, of course, he can't confirm that. And what is their source? And they always say, our source is somebody in South Korean intelligence. Folks, I don't like everything that Jason Unruhe does, and he knows that. We have very different views. OPCW whistleblowers. Okay, all right. Let me just finish this North Korea point. I'll get on both of these. But, I don't like everything he does, but for a while he was on a kick of refuting some of these, hysterical lies and projections and conjectures and rumors about North Korea. And I'll never forget one of the ones he refuted. And I saw this article. North Korea believes in unicorns, right? And this was going around. It was all over U.S. media. Ha ha, stupid North Korea believes in unicorns. Oh, what are they, 3 years old? This was all over, headlines everywhere. North Korea believes in unicorns. North Korea believes in unicorns. It was everywhere. And if you actually looked at the report, if you read the fine print, it said that in North Korea, they had dug up an architectural site, some ancient ruins, and they had translated the name of this site, and it was called Tomb of the Unicorn. That's it. So North Korea had never claimed there were unicorns. North Korea does not believe in unicorns. They found an agricultural site. How many old sites have we dug up in Denmark or the Netherlands that have words about dragons in them? And no one goes, oh, stupid white Europeans believe in dragons. They're idiots. I mean, it shows how they're looking for anything to demonize North Korea. Right? People joke about, members of the Kim family who've gotten killed and then they come back to life and then Kim kills them again in American media and then they come back to life. And there's always rumors about, there was a claim, I don't know if folks remember, there was somebody who there was a power struggle, right? In North Korea, right? There was a power struggle. There was an individual who was high up in the party who was executed. And a satirical magazine in China sarcastically put out the claim that Kim Jong-il had executed this person by feeding them to a pack of wild dogs. And of course, that was satire, right? Of course they didn't. They just shot him. That's how they execute people in North Korea. They shoot him. But American media, like Time Magazine and other publications, I believe, came on out with it. Right? Yep, he executed him by feeding to a pack of wild dogs. Oh, they ran with it like it was true. Folks, there's a lot of fake news about North Korea, and there's a desperate attempt to divide the country. That is really desperate. There's a real hope that they can divide the country's leadership, divide the Communist Party. So I would hold off, okay? I would hold off, right? If North Korea comes forward and says that Kim Jong-il has surgery, photos of, let's wait, right? It could be true, could be not true. We don't know, right? And when it comes to North Korea, that's a country, like you'll remember, that news doesn't really escape. So about the 5G thing, yeah, I don't buy it. Are there possible health effects of 5G that we don't know about? Sure, but is 5G responsible for coronavirus? That's a really tough sell. Really tough sell, right? Not buying it. I'll wait and see. We never know, right? Vaping, right? We're now seeing, people said vaping was more healthy than smoking. Obviously, now that is not the case. We realize that vaping is probably more dangerous than smoking. So, we don't always know the health effects of these new devices. But I tend to think that 5G, I'm waiting to see the evidence that 5G is worse for your health than what we already have. I'm waiting to see the evidence. If it's there, I'll buy it. The other thing I'm waiting to see that makes me suspicious is we all know, you've seen the articles, they all know China is leading the world in 5G. China does 5G much better and more efficiently than Western capitalist countries. So there's going to be an attempt to say we should just not have 5G. And this always happens, right? I mean, it's just like now they're saying, oh, all these countries in Africa, it's so bad for the environment if they get electricity. We can't, for the environment, we just got to stop electrifying African countries. Maybe if they want to put up a windmill, fine. If they want to put up a solar panel, fine. But we can't have a coal power plant in an African country. No, it's bad for the environment. Obama, you'll remember Obama went to South Africa and he actually told his audience, if everyone here had air conditioning and a car, why, that would destroy Mother Earth. He's basically telling Africans they should stay poor, right? Barack Obama said that. So, there's always an attempt to stop technological development. Now, is it possible that 5G, China's doing it much more efficiently. You can read articles. I did a whole video about why socialism makes 5G more efficient, right? We've got competing telecommunications companies here, and it's they do it much more efficiently. But there you go. Okay, so 5G. OPCW, yeah, right. The fact that members of the OPCW, that's the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. OPCW. And that is what the UN uses to inspect. It's the international body. If you get rid of chemical weapons, you're part of it, the OPCW, and they have inspectors to make sure you're complying with the agreement. And after the OPCW report that implicated the Syrian government, said that Syria was responsible for a chemical attack that took place, a number of the weapons inspectors from the inspection team have come forward and said they don't buy it. They said that the chemicals were released from the ground. They were not dropped from the air. It doesn't match. And the samples that was provided to the OPCW to conduct their tests, they didn't actually get them from the test site. They didn't visit the test site, the site of the chemical attack, but rather they got them from the white helmets, right, that are tied to al-Nusra and terrorist groups. They're an anti-regime group, a group trying to overthrow the Syrian government, conveniently just provided in a bag, some chemical weapons to the weapons inspectors, and then they tested them, and then they matched the Syrian government, so it must be, right? At this point, right, there is no place the Syrian government could be storing any chemical weapons. They turned over their chemical weapons in 2013. The UN weapons inspecting team has been all over Syria. There's no place they could be hiding weapons, right? Meanwhile, no one denies the fact that al-Nusra has chemical weapons. No one denies the fact that terrorist groups have been using chemical weapons. They've been using them from the beginning. And when you have chemical weapons inspectors who don't visit the site of the alleged attack, they just, got a bag of dirt from the white helmets and people tied to Al-Qaeda and tested it and said, oh, there it is. Yep, they're guilty. And, the facts aren't there, right? Why would it be in the interest of the Syrian government to use chemical weapons? What would they gain from it? What in the world would they gain from it at this point, right? They're winning the war, right? Doesn't make any sense. And the facts aren't there. And the fact that members of the inspection team have come forward, emails have been leaked. And yeah, as the person who sent the super chat pointed out, it's being ignored. U.S. News, Democracy Now!, liberal, activist media, they just kind of pretend it's not there. They don't want to talk about this, right? You're supposed to hate Syria, right? All these people don't understand that Ba'athist Arab socialism is left-wing. It's anti-fascist. It's anti-imperialist. And yeah, it's kind of tragic. Not just kind of tragic. So if folks have more super chats, I'm happy to answer them. But while we get to that, folks, today I was watching a movie. Called Horns and Halos. And it was funny. The movie was about, in 1999, there was a book called Fortunate Son published about, it was a critical biography of George W. Bush. And the publisher was basically bullied into pulling it. And so a small publishing house in New York City, Soft Skull Press, went ahead and published it themselves. And a good friend of mine, Sander Hicks, was involved in that publishing. And it's kind of a fun movie. I watched it. It's on Vimeo. It's on Amazon. You can watch the documentary. I watched it. It was a lot of fun. Horns and halos, and it was interesting. And I was looking at that, and that's like 1999, 2000. But it's funny, and I was thinking about coronavirus, right? My hair is getting long, right? Everyone's hair is getting long. We can't go to the barber shop unless you can cut your hair yourself. You're pretty much, your hair is growing out. And that's pretty 1990s, right? I mean, I figured if my hair continues to grow out like this, right? I mean, it's not like long hair, but it's like big, poofy hair, right? I might have to start making jokes about the X-Files, right? Or I might have to start making jokes about Monica Lewinsky. But I've reflected on this before. Please impersonate Barack Obama. Again, look, I'm Barack Obama. And I hope that satisfies your craving. But in the 1990s, 1999 in particular, really set the stage for the era that we're living in, right? 1999, if you think about 1999, so much of what we're experiencing today started in 1999, right? We're now 20 years into the 21st century. 20 years into the 21st century. And it seems like so many of the big trends now started during that time. So first of all, 1999, right? 1999, that is the year, right, where Putin first got elected president of Russia. That is also the year that Hugo Chavez first got elected president of Venezuela. And why did both of those leaders come to power? They were both elected to deal with the disaster of neoliberalism and neoliberal economics in South America and in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. Free market policies were implemented, and it resulted in economic catastrophe. Russia was looted. They experienced 20 to 30% unemployment, about what we have now. State industries were sold off. Factories closed their doors. Most of the farming system went bankrupt. People didn't have access to food. It was a disaster. Russia experienced economic catastrophe, and BP and Hermitage Capital Management and all kinds of wealthy American companies went in there and had a field day looting the country, just looting the place. Russia was being looted, right? It was just being devastated economically. I mean, it was plunder. Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton bragged about the fact that he meddled in Russia's elections to make sure that in 1996 Boris Yeltsin got reelected. Huge efforts were done, and I went to NYU to a panel where we heard a presentation from Bill Bradley, former U.S. Senator from New Jersey, Bill Bradley, and he talked about how much the Clinton administration, it was winner take all. They looted the place. They just destroyed Russia in the 1990s. Awful. People lost their life savings. People were desperate. People were poor. And, if you watch his speech at NYU, Bill Bradley talks about how they would joke about it. They'd say, let's go stuff some more shit down Boris's throat. The atmosphere was just this very, very cruel, plundering atmosphere. I mean, the Clinton administration oversaw the economic devastation of Russia. Right? It was a disaster. And in that atmosphere, Vladimir Putin emerged based on his economic program, his doctoral dissertation, his academic thesis that he wrote, laid out an economic plan to reboot Russia's economy with state control of oil and natural gas. And it worked. It worked out very well, worked very successfully. Again, by putting oil under state control, by putting natural gas under state control, by creating two gigantic state-controlled mega corporations, mega energy corporations, Gazprom, the natural gas company, and Rosneft, the oil company. By doing that, he saved Russia's economy. And at the same time, the oil prices shot up. You remember after Bush's invasion of Iraq, the prices went up, the prices went up. And with that, Russia suddenly had its own manufacturing, its domestic industries. People were being raised up out of poverty, and it was very successful. Unemployment was reduced. The wages of people actually tripled. Right, there was a lot of inflation, so it wasn't exactly tripled, but I mean, in sheer numbers, the wages of people tripled. Industrial output vastly increased, and Putin fixed Russia's economy with public control of oil and gas and basically reasserting state control over the economy, right? The Russian state apparatus, um, it had been pushed out. They had had free market policies. They had Yeltsin. And there was a swift move toward re-implementing state control in a lot of dramatic ways. And it was very successful, right? People talk about Bonapartism. People talk about drawing from the Soviet past, using some of the economic knowledge of the Soviet past and applying it to post-Soviet Russia. A lot of different analysis of it, but regardless, Putin saved Russia from the disaster of the 1990s. And nobody in the United States knew about the disaster of Russia during the 1990s. I mean, it was like you didn't know about it. We all thought Russia was doing great. They're free. They're free, right? They have capitalism now. They're doing great. They're just doing great. Russia's free. No one ever talked about it. It was like unacknowledged, but it was a disaster. And the Putin presidency, the election of Vladimir Putin, was the beginning of Russia's turnaround. And now Russia is once again a major geopolitical superpower. Venezuela also suffered dramatically due to neoliberalism, right? I mean, the cuts in government spending, right? It was devastated. Venezuela in the 1990s was just devastated by free market policies. The electricity wouldn't come on for weeks. People wouldn't have food. The garbage wouldn't be collected. And it was austerity. In order to get their loans from the IMF, they would have to lay off government workers, right? So they would cut everything they possibly could in government spending, and the international bankers would say to them, "Well, you didn't cut enough spending. If we're going to give you another loan, you gotta cut some more spending." So they'd lay off power plant employees, power plant spending, and as a result, the electricity wouldn't come on for weeks. They would come back to them and say, "Oh, you didn't cut enough. You got to cut some more if you want to get our IMF loan." And so then they would lay off sanitation workers, and then garbage would stop being collected in major parts of the country. It was a disaster economically in the 1990s. And Chavez came to power in 1999, right? His political party was originally called the Movement for the Fifth Republic. He was campaigning on the platform of he was going to have a new constitution. He was a Bolivarian. He was a follower of Simón Bolívar, the national liberator of South America. And he said he did not believe in capitalism or socialism. He was for the third way. The third way. And he got elected on that platform. And the election was very much a referendum on these free market policies that had devastated the country. And then, right after Chavez took office, and he's a military guy, big former paratrooper, huge, large military guy. And after he gets elected, they have mudslides in the country where these people, these poor people who live in like hills, and the mud it's devastating. So he gets on the television and he calls for the people of the country to do community service, to help their fellow man. He builds up this spirit of national populism, and the military is sent to the areas that are devastated by the mudslide, and it helps people. And he builds these networks. In every neighborhood, you have Bolivarian circles that are like networks of people that are supposed to support the president and carry out his agenda of making a better Venezuela. And in that atmosphere, he handles these mudslides amazingly. The whole country comes together. To push back these mudslides, and Chavez is widely loved. And so in that atmosphere, he passes a new constitution. The country has a new Bolivarian constitution. Very exciting, right? And that was the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution. And then you'll remember after 9/11, Chavez, he said, clearly 9/11 was a horrendous crime. Terrorism is not justified. But that doesn't give the United States the right to kill children either. And he shows pictures of Afghan children killed in the bombing. He says this is not legitimate. The United States shouldn't be invading Afghanistan. This is not moral, right? There's a police action that's necessary here. And he denounces the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, strongly denounces the U.S. talk of invading Iraq, right? And then after that, he appoints a member of the Communist Party to his cabinet. He says the Venezuelan Communist Party, they're an essential part of his campaign. Chavez would not have been elected if he didn't get the support in a Popular Front coalition from the Communist Party. So he appoints to his cabinet a member of the Communist Party. And then there is a coup. There is a military coup against Hugo Chavez. He's kidnapped. The right wing declare that they're in the new government. But then the rank-and-file soldiers rise up. He's rescued, and suddenly, 2 days after the coup, he's back in power, and he is stronger than ever. 2003, he announces that Venezuela is on the road to 21st century socialism. Cuban doctors are flown into the country, right? Healthcare clinics are set up throughout the country. That was the beginning, right? Folks, I remember this very, very vividly because I visited Quito, Ecuador in 1999 when I was 12 years old. That's how you can guess my age now. 1999, when my friend Sander was fighting with the Bush administration and trying to publish a book that they had tried to suppress. Well, I guess they weren't in office yet, but fighting with the Bush family. At that point, 1999, I was 12 years old, and because my dad, some business stuff my dad does, I got to visit Ecuador. And so I went to Quito, Ecuador. I was 12 years old. I knew nothing about economics. I knew nothing about geopolitics. And I had never been to a third world country before. And I got out of the airplane and I saw so much poverty. I had never seen that level of poverty before. I saw people that were devastated. I mean, outside the airport every day, there were crowds and crowds of starving, desperate people. I had never seen that level of suffering before in my life. And we did tourism around the capital. We would go to these old churches. Outside the old church, there'd be desperate poor people begging. I mean, it was unbelievable, the amount of poverty I saw in Ecuador in 1999. It was horrendous. I did not know why that was, but I was overwhelmed. It had a huge, profound emotional effect on me. I had never seen that level of poverty before. Well, I now know what had happened. The IMF and the World Bank, international bankers, global monopoly capitalism, had forced Ecuador to give up its own currency, had just pummeled Ecuador, neoliberalism, and it had wrecked the country. I mean, the country had been wrecked. Its food system had collapsed. It was not producing its own food. Peasants were being kicked off their land. Neoliberal economics had destroyed Ecuador. And it was devastating, the place. And folks, I went back to Ecuador in 2013. In 2013, I was a communist activist, right? And I got on a plane with some other communist activists, and we went to the World Festival of Youth and Students. And I saw a completely different country. Rafael Correa was in office. It was a Bolivarian socialist government. It was like the country that I had visited when I was 12 years old, and this country that I visited in, when I was in my 20s was like night and day. I saw huge paved highways. I saw beautiful, beautiful new apartment complexes. They had renamed all the streets after indigenous leaders. I thought that was kind of cool, right? There were a lot of indigenous leaders that the streets were named after. I saw a new public transportation system. I mean, were there some people who were down and out? I mean, I guess there were some older folks. Like there was a very short, old indigenous woman who was going around selling cigarettes, there was some poverty, but it was nothing. It was not the same city that I had been to in 1999. Socialism, public control of the oil, right? Public control of the major industries, government spending on infrastructure, public control of banking had turned the country around, right? Ecuador vastly improved due to the socialist policies of Rafael Correa. And I saw it with my own eyes, right? This stuff started in 1999. 1999 was the year. Have you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman? I haven't read the book itself. I've seen a lot of interviews with the author, and it's very accurate. It describes what the IMF and the World Bank have done, and it's good. It's from somebody on the inside of it, right? And I know Jeffrey Sachs, who was the economist who was involved in all this stuff, right? He himself has now come out against what he himself has done, and he does a lot of exposés against this kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it was widely known. The neoliberal free market experiment failed. What Milton Friedman advocates, what Ayn Rand advocates, what Alan Greenspan pushed onto our country for years, deregulation, free trade, globalism, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it didn't work in this country because we're so wealthy. It took it a while to catch up. But ultimately, it doesn't work. It leads to huge international monopolies getting rich and the whole world getting poor, right? Milton Friedman economics, Alan Greenspan economics, Ayn Rand economics doesn't work, right? And that should be blatantly obvious. And Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a very good piece. There's a lot written about it. Now, that's also the year, you'll remember, 1999, that the Asian tigers went. There was that big crash in the Asian tigers. And basically what it was that the United States had helped the Asian tiger countries build themselves up as kind of a buffer against socialism and against China, right? And it had started really, it had really been biggest in the 60s under Johnson and under Kennedy. There was the idea was we're going to help third world countries develop and industrialize. We're going to prop up like Bonapartist regimes in South Korea, in Taiwan, in different places, Singapore, and they're going to become wealthier. And as they become wealthier, they will kind of be a buffer. And at the same time, China was booming, so there was someone to trade with. A lot of these countries were trading with China. So the United States thought it was in its interest. Wall Street thought it was in its interest to see development in the Asian markets. But you'll remember that in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union had fallen, that relationship started to go sour. Right? Because these were all Bonapartist governments. South Korea, a huge amount of state control over the economy, right? I mean, it's Bonapartist, it's a capitalist country, but a lot of the corporations are basically wings, of the government. The government tells them exactly what to do. It's capitalism, but it's a heavily state-controlled capitalism, and that's the same for Taiwan. That's the same for Singapore, right? And in the 1990s, the relationship between the United States and the Asian tiger countries started to go sour. Right? I mean, the USA didn't particularly care for Park Chung-hee, but that was, I mean, in the 1990s especially, right? In the 80s, you saw the toppling of the US-backed military regime in South Korea. And so a lot of these countries started doing things that the United States didn't quite approve of, right? I mean, there's the famous case in Singapore where there was all this outrage because Lee Kuan Yew caned a young American. I don't know if folks remember that. What was his name? I don't remember what his name was, but he was the child of a young American diplomat, and they caned him. They gave him a caning for violating the law and spraying some graffiti. I mean, there was all these international incidents where the USA was condemning the Asian tiger countries. And finally, 1999, you saw the Western capitalists coordinatedly, they coordinated to pull all their money out of the Asian tiger markets and crash the countries. Now, they were strong enough on their own. A lot of them were able to recover. But it was a devastating blow. It was a very devastating blow. You'll also remember, now 1999 was the year, the color revolution thing, right? That had been going on for a long time. Brzezinski had figured out how to stage fake revolutions in anti-imperialist countries, get people all fired up and, get the intellectuals and confuse people out there protesting. But in 1999, with the internet, it took on a totally different character. In China, for example, in 1999, the United States, U.S. intelligence was actively supporting the Falun Gong, which is this crazy cult. Right? They believe that people have magical wheels inside of their stomachs, and if you do the right exercises, like you will go to heaven because the magical wheel in your stomach will get stimulated. I mean, they think that one of the greatest crimes of modern China is that women are allowed to vote, that women are in the political process. They want feudalism back. They're this primitive cult in China, and with the help of American intelligence, they were coordinating all their activities, with the internet, and they were using the internet to coordinate their protests and their disruptions of Chinese society. And they were using the internet to do it, and so China had to, start cracking down on the internet because they were trying to figure out how to stop this stuff, right? And yeah, Falun Gong, that's Epoch Times, right? Supposedly they're not related, right? But it's the same people. So the same kind of thing happened in Serbia, right? 1999, you saw the NATO bombing campaign against Serbia. And what did they ultimately use to bring down Milosevic? It wasn't the bombing campaign that brought Milosevic down. It was this fake CIA color revolutionary movement called Otpor, and their symbol was a fist, and they claimed to be anarchists, and they were basically, fake color revolutionaries, right? That's all they were. But it was this fake movement that had all this slick internet propaganda that brought Milosevic out of power and that overthrew the socialist government of Yugoslavia. 1999 was also the year of the Columbine massacre, right? And that was the first big school shooting in the United States, right? In the 1920s, I guess there was a school bombing. Somebody blew up a school in the 1990s, or in the 1920s. But this was a major school shooting, right? The Columbine massacre, right? And the whole country was just devastated by it. There was a huge crackdown. And it was based on and all these things about the Columbine massacre that were not in any way true. Suddenly were published in American media. For example, they claimed that the shooters had been part of a club called the Trench Coat Mafia. Well, it turned out they were not. In fact, the only time they were ever seen wearing trench coats was the day they did their shooting, and they'd covered it up. And all kinds of fake stuff was in the media about the Columbine massacre. The CNN narrative was just wrong. I mean, it was pure fake news. They claimed that there was this girl who was asked if she believed in Jesus, and she said yes, Cassie Burnell, and they killed her, and that was debunked. That didn't happen. All the witnesses never heard that account. That was made up as religious propaganda, and that's been thoroughly debunked. There were claims that it was about bullying. That was one of the widespread claims. These kids, they shot up their school because they were being bullied. Well, that was debunked. They weren't. In fact, one of the shooters was himself a bully, had a record of bullying other people. So that was debunked. Almost everything that mainstream media told us. I mean, the death count was right. The shooters' identities were right. But beyond that, they got a lot wrong. I mean, they just didn't have the facts. And it showed that mainstream media is very, very untrustworthy, right? 1999 was a big year, right? The 90s was a big time. I just watched this movie about what a friend of mine went through during the 1990s, but it was widespread. And we live in an era that basically started. The neoliberal order started coming apart, right? After the fall of the Soviet Union, Western capitalism declared itself the winner, right? It had unleashed some social liberalism. It wasn't the American capitalism in the 1950s that declared itself the winner. It was a new socially liberal American capitalism. It had gay rights. Gay rights was on the march. It had internet and computers was on the march, and it was this new slick Western free market end of history kind of thing. And by about 1999, that new world order, right? George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush had called it the New World Order. 1999 was kind of the beginning of the New World Order unraveling. And what we are seeing now is the complete unraveling of the New World Order. Folks, the oil prices are lower than ever, and China is an oil importing country. So they, you can bet, are going to be buying as much cheap oil as they can. And as their economy starts coming back into motion, way ahead of our economy, right? Our economy is nowhere near coming. I mean, they say it's going to be at least another month. But as China's economy starts to come back into motion, they're going to have all that cheap oil. They're going to be producing things like you wouldn't believe, and they are going to start speeding ahead like you wouldn't believe. Meanwhile, we don't know when the chaos and turmoil here in the United States is going to come to an end. We don't know when it's going to come to an end. These things are so out of control here in the United States. We do not know when this is going to come to an end. And China is already moving ahead with that cheap oil. I mean, we are seeing the end of the New World Order. The New World Order that declared victory in 1991, I mean, the end of history world order is coming apart. It's coming apart. And how ugly is it going to get as it comes apart? I don't know. But this is this unraveling. This is society-wide unraveling. This is society-wide unraveling, and it's very, very dangerous. Folks, what else is on your mind? I appreciate chats and super chats. We can talk about things all night long. I am in no rush to get any place, as you can tell. So please, if you have something you want me to talk about, go ahead. I'm all ears. Here I am. People are talking about election fraud in the primaries. Election fraud in the primaries. Well, I mean, how could you conduct a primary in this atmosphere? Telling people it's safe to go to the polls and vote. I mean, it speaks for itself. If any other country were to do such a thing, that would be declared to be a fraudulent election. But here in the United States, we are conducting an election campaign season in this atmosphere. We don't know if the conventions will even happen. Yeah, pretty wild. Pretty wild. What else is on people's minds? I see Lady Ravenhair talking about the situation. Folks, on Saturday at the Catholic Charity Center in Queens, there was a line of people desperate to get food and help that was 23 blocks long, 23 city blocks full of people in line to get help from the Catholic Charities. Now, thank goodness in New York State, they have frozen and they have stopped evictions temporarily. But a lot of people can't pay their rent, but they have evictions on hold. The court eviction proceedings are on hold, so people aren't being kicked out of their apartments. And they're trying to figure out what they want to do with the rent. There are some forces that are saying to freeze the rent, to cancel the rent. There are some that that are saying not to do it, and they're having a debate in the state legislature and in local government about it, and they're not evicting people. They're not having eviction proceedings against people. Court eviction proceedings are on hold. But in other parts of the country, that's not the case. And I mean, when you talk about lines of people, 23 blocks trying to get help, I mean, this is crazy. Thank you, Herb Bryant, for the super chat. There are rumors about $2,000 per adult in the USA. I can't believe it. Yeah, I don't see it either. However, they do need to stabilize this. And the question is, how much can they get away with? I feel like now there's a bit of an austerity experiment going on where they're trying to figure out how much they can get away with. How much can they get away with before things get ugly? They want things to be stable, yes, but they also want to see how much they can get away with, right? And things are already getting a little unstable, right? We're seeing these protests, these right-wingers waving their guns around. We want to work. We're seeing, there's also big protests now for, cancel the rent, rent strike, general strike. So it's complicated. But basically, I feel like there's a feeling among the ruling class right now. How much can we get away with, and how can we use this against our rivals? I'm seeing mainstream media saying that Kim Jong-il is sick and in critical condition. I talked about that earlier, and that, we don't know, right? There's a lot of fake news out of Korea, and I went on about that for quite a while, explaining that we just don't know. We just don't know. And that, remember when Kim Jong-il died, U.S. media had no knowledge of it until afterwards. So there you go. We don't know. We don't know what's going on. And yeah, I mean, that's the situation. And around the country, yeah. And here in New York, I'm sure there's lots of people who have lost their job who maybe they're not getting evicted, but they can't afford to pay their rent. And the question is, how much can they get away with? How much can they get away with is what they're trying to figure out. With the sanctions on Iran, the whole international community is saying, how in the world can they impose these sanctions on Iran? How can they be doing this? How can they possibly be imposing sanctions at a time like this? How can they be doing this? But, so we have, Mike Pompeo, we have the State Department claiming that, the sanctions on Iran, they're not hurting the medical efforts at all. That's a lie. Now we have Trump saying he might send ventilators to Iran. Why would he send ventilators to Iran? That doesn't make any sense. The sanctions on Iran have been actively hurting. Um, can you, between, do you see any parallels between DSA and Social Democrats? Well, here's the thing. Okay, so the Second International, right? I believe DSA is not part of the Second International anymore. It gets a little confusing, right? Let me back up here. All right, so you have your First International. That's Karl Marx, that's Frederick Engels, the International Working Men's Association. Pope Francis, okay. Pope Francis. Writing it down. So you have your First International. The First International is the International Working Men's Association, Karl Marx. It falls apart because of anarchism. See, then the Second International comes in. Second International started in Germany, German Social Democratic Party. Eventually, there's like labor parties, socialist parties formed throughout Europe. And it was dissolved in the lead up to World War I. When World War I broke out, all these countries are at war with each other, and so they obviously can't be having big international gatherings to coordinate their activities. So World War I breaks out, you have the collapse of the Second International. But it was restored after World War I, and it was Social Democrats. It was anti-Bolshevik. It was the Socialist Party of the United States. It was the Labour Party of Britain, and it's still around. It's called Socialist International, and it still exists, right? It still exists. The Socialist International. And what's interesting about it is you have some anti-imperialist forces that are in it, right? The Venezuelan, Bolivarian socialism is part of it. Some of the Ba'ath countries are part of it, but you also have some, a lot of imperialist countries that are in it. The French Socialist Party, British Labour Party. The DSA is no longer part of it. I don't remember exactly. I heard that at some convention they voted to withdraw from the Socialist International. So technically they're not part of the Socialist International. But it's just, they have a gathering. They have a convention of parties, and it's lots of parties all over the world, and it's pretty loose, and it still exists. DSA is a very broad coalition, right? There's a lot of people in DSA. There's a lot of people I know that are in DSA that are amazing people, right? And that DSA is very loose. You can join it. I could be a member of DSA. I mean, I can't join any political organization because I'm a journalist, but if I wanted to, I could get on the internet right now, fill out a form, and I could be a member of DSA. And I appreciate that. And they do great work and all of that. So it's a broad coalition. There's a lot of different people in DSA, a lot of different voices. Cornel West is associated with DSA. Michael Moore is a member of DSA now. It's a broad coalition. A lot of people are in it. However, I will say, that there are some people in DSA that are what you could call State Department socialists, right? And I don't think they would disavow that. The founder of DSA was Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington worked in the administration of Lyndon Johnson, right? He wrote a book called The Other America, which was about poverty in the United States. He was an advisor to Lyndon Johnson. He was in the Johnson White House. He wrote a book called Socialism, which is very anti-communist, which is dedicated to the Trotskyist Max Shachtman, who was his mentor, right? And, that was the founder of DSA. Another guy who was key in the founding of DSA was Irving Howe. And Irving Howe, he was a renegade, he was a Trotskyite, and he had the CIA all over him, okay? Irving Howe wrote for Partisan Review magazine. Irving Howe would write articles for like the New York Times as a socialist denouncing anti-war protesters for being too pro-Vietnamese, for being too Stalinist. Irving Howe, Partisan Review magazine, Congress for Cultural Freedom was full of these people, these kind of like ex-Trotskyists, maybe still kind of Trotskyist social democrats who really hate communists. Gloria Steinem, right? She's a member of DSA. She was the face of feminism in the United States. She makes no apology about the fact that in the 1960s, before she became the big feminist in the United States, she was a CIA operative. She ran CIA operations. She organized with the CIA to disrupt the World Communist Youth Festival in Vienna. She was walking hand in hand with the CIA. So, DSA is a broad tent, okay? and it's a broad coalition. There's a lot of different voices in it. There's a lot of different people in it with a lot of different views. There's there's influence of intelligence agencies. There's influence of the Democratic Party. There's also influence of rank and file activists, labor unions, big labor union influence in the DSA. There's Maoists in the DSA. There's Trotskyists in the DSA. There's Marxist-Leninists in the DSA. It's a broad coalition, right? It's kind of like a labor union. Labor unions, right? I mean, there's a lot of labor unions in this country that are Republican, that support Republicans, right? There are a lot of labor unions in this country that are tied with the Democratic Party that have no communist clauses in them, but they represent a very large group of people, right? Labor unions represent the workers in a particular workplace. Well, the DSA, I mean, you can look at Michael Harrington and his origins. You can look at what's interesting to note is, I remember when I was first getting politically active, when I was just getting politically active, kids, back in the day when I was an old man, back in the time, I'm just joking, but it was like a decade ago, right? Like 2001, 2002, 2003, when I was looking at communist groups, I remember the DSA. I remember looking at the DSA, and they had a really poorly made website, and they had a newspaper that was really short. It was like front and back. And I would ask people about DSA, and they would say, is that even still around anymore? It was like DSA didn't exist. But it existed, right? But it was like they had a banquet once a year. Cornell West was in it. A lot of academics were in it. And it was just, it was an entity that it was around. But, in the 1990s, DSA had been a very big thing in the labor unions. John Sweeney had become head of the AFL-CIO. He was a member of DSA. And it was like the DSA was seen as like a labor bureaucracy kind of group. But around the 2000s, it was like DSA was defunct. People used to joke that DSA was just a club. It was like a club for for labor bureaucrats and like socialist college professors. They had a banquet once a year, and that was it. It was like not a group. So I remember that, and like their website was like very poor, and it was just like it was. I would say DSA to people, and people would be like, yeah, that's not really a thing. DSA didn't seem to become a thing again. I started hearing about DSA later. I started hearing about DSA during the Occupy Wall Street protests. Suddenly, during the Occupy Wall Street protests, I would see banners with DSA on it. I would get leaflets that said DSA. DSA started to become a thing that was during Occupy, right? And then especially during the Bernie movement, all of a sudden it was everywhere. And then Jacobin magazine. Had all this funding and was, Jacobin magazine. Let's remember they on MSNBC did a segment to promote Jacobin when they first started, All In with Chris Hayes. And, so with Jacobin magazine, with the Bernie campaign, all of a sudden DSA was everywhere again. And that's the thing, is that DSA's history, I get the idea that DSA, if you look at their history, it's kind of like they're big, they're huge, they're everywhere, and then they're not around anymore, and then they're big, they're huge, they're everywhere, and then they're not around anymore, and then they're big, they're huge, they're everywhere. I mean, it's kind of like a zig and a zag, and that may be that their funding. It may be an issue of their funding, what funding is available. It may be that issue. Anyway. It may be an issue when the money is available or whatever, but like DSA became a big thing in the 80s, in the early 80s. That was the first time it was a big thing, right? And it was Michael Harrington and the Democratic Socialist. It was the Socialist Party of the United States dissolved, I guess. And so the people that wanted to keep an independent party, they formed Socialist Party USA. And then, the people that were more conservative and supported Republicans became Social Democrats USA. And then the folks that wanted to be the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee formed the Democratic, and they eventually became DSA. And that was Michael Harrington. And so then they had a magazine called In These Times. And they were everywhere. And a lot of ex-Maoists joined them. And the Democratic part, at that point, DSA was explicitly anti-communist. The D in DSA meant not communist, right? It was like, if you read their publications, Harrington and all of that, it was clear, we're for democratic socialism, not Marxism. They were making very, very clear they were an anti-communist organization. in the 90s, they were doing labor work. They were in the labor union bureaucracy. And I mean, at this point, anybody can join them, right? They seem to be pretty open. Now, someone told me they do have a ban on anyone who's part of a Marxist-Leninist faction being in the group, but it's not enforced. Is what I've heard. But then I don't have good confirmation of that. I've had other people tell me that's not the case. They don't have that rule. They do allow dual membership. So I don't really know, honestly. I mean, it is interesting. So, I mean, you're asking me what I think of DSA, and I'm just telling you, it's a mass formation dedicated to free healthcare, free education, and that's the other thing, is you talk to some DSAers. And socialism means, what does socialism mean as far as they're concerned? It's just like Sweden, Norway and Sweden, free healthcare, free education. It's just Britain, right? We'll turn the USA into Britain, we'll turn the USA into France. You talk to other DSAers, socialism has never really existed anywhere in the world, and they want an absolute worker participatory socialist democracy, and they almost sound like Trotskyists, right? They're like third camp Trotskyists. And that's the weird thing. And it seems like to some people, DSA is just the Bernie platform. And to other people, DSA is trying to enact the Bernie Sanders agenda. So, there you go. Yeah. Now, someone's asking me what I think of the RCP and Bob Avakian. Well, I'm not going to tell you what I think of them, because that's not adequate. Like, I'm going to tell you who they are. Right? And I'm sure they won't like it. The RCP never likes it if you talk about them. So I'm sure they won't like what I'm going to say. But you want to know who they are, right? So I'll break it down for who the RCP is. So, in the 1960s, right, you had Students for a Democratic Society, which was a big activist group. And Berkeley, California was a big center of activism in the 1960s. That's San Francisco, Bay Area, Berkeley, right? UC Berkeley it was a very, very, a hotbed. There was the free speech movement in the early 60s, right? UC Berkeley had banned any activism on campus about off-campus issues. And so all these college students protested around it. There's a very famous photograph of they had arrested some students that had a civil rights literature table, and they had a rule against it, so they'd arrested the students for having it. So then all the students came and sat on top of the police car, and a crowd of hundreds of students they seized this police car, and they set up microphones on top and gave speeches, seizing this police car. Very famous, right? The leader of the free speech movement at Berkeley was a college student, Mario Savio, an Italian fellow, and he said, "There comes a time where the operation of the machine becomes so odious that you cannot even passively participate, and you've got to throw yourself onto the gears and onto the wheels and make it clear that unless you're free, the machine won't be stopped from functioning at all." Right? And it was at Berkeley. It was a political campus, and it was like the right of young people on a college campus to have clubs that talked about civil rights and talked about the Vietnam War. They were fighting for it. And at Berkeley, you had different groups. There were different communist groups that had a presence. You had the Communist Party USA. You had the Berkeley, the independent socialist clubs of Berkeley eventually became the ISO, right? They were the Shachtman Club, and they cut their ties with Shachtman, and they became the ISO. You had the Young Socialist Alliance, and that was like the SWP, the Trotskyites. And you had the progressive labor movement, which were like Maoists, and that was UC Berkeley. There was this kind of left-wing activist atmosphere at Berkeley, and they marched for civil rights. They protested movie theaters. All right, Yugoslavia. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Do you think the American failures help the world? Do you think America's failure to help the world in the coronavirus will lead to China? So back to the RCP. I'll finish this RCP thing, then I'll address the super chat. So on the RCP thing, there's a lot to say here because there's a lot here. So you will get answered super chat, folks, but I'm going to answer this RCP stuff. So Berkeley had this kind of activist-y atmosphere, all right, protesting the Vietnam War, and so then you had the Black Panther Party that emerged in Oakland, California, which is also in the Bay Area, right? In Oakland, you had the Black Panthers, Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, and this, that was their armed patrols against police brutality, and they became like this kind of, very important group in the black community. You had very few, you had a number of white people that supported the Black Panther Party. And so you have this individual by the name of Bob Avakian. And Bob Avakian's father was a California judge, and he was actually on the California State Supreme Court. And what's interesting is, Bob Avakian's family are Armenian. And in that part of California, in the Bay Area, there are a lot of very, very wealthy Armenians. There's a lot of very, very wealthy Armenian folks who moved to the United States following World War II. And Avakian, he comes from money, comes from a lot of money. Your father's on the California State Supreme Court. His father was on the Berkeley School Board for a while, was this very, very prominent judge in the area. And, Bob Avakian, he becomes, he's kind of a big shot on the campus, and he supported he made a point of supporting the Black Panthers, and he organized like a committee to support the Black Panthers, and he was kind of well known. And then he was hired by Ramparts Magazine, and that's another interesting outlet. Ramparts Magazine is a magazine that was started in the Bay Area that was kind of a radical magazine that supported the Black Panthers and supported protesting the Vietnam War. It's called Ramparts. It was originally a Roman Catholic magazine, and suddenly it became this new left radical magazine, very anti-Soviet Union, very anti-communist, but it was also very like pro-protest. It was like a movement magazine. And Avakian worked for it. And who was the editor of Ramparts magazine? David Horowitz. That name sound familiar to anybody? David Horowitz? Yeah, the Fox News guy, the right wing, Discover the Networks. That guy was the editor of Ramparts magazine. And Ramparts magazine, it had a really big impact. For example, there would be Eldridge Cleaver. Eldridge Cleaver was an African-American man who was in prison, but Ramparts magazine started publishing his writings, Soul on Ice, other publications. That was the result of Ramparts magazine. So Avakian writes for Ramparts magazine. David Horowitz is the editor of it. And I guess what happened was that, all these students had been protesters. So then, in the 60s, coming to the end of the late 60s, in like 1970, I guess, there was an oil strike in Richmond County, California. And so Bob Avakian got hired by the labor union, I guess, to coordinate bringing students from Richmond, California, or bringing activist students from California and around the country to Richmond to support the strikers on the picket line. And, if you see that, it was like he developed this kind of like, this is the most important moment of your life. Go to Richmond, California. Go there now. Quit your job. Sell your house. Now is the time. You got to get to Richmond. This is the moment. We're going to merge the radical student movement with these striking oil workers. Now is the time. And the RCP loves to do that. They get into this mode where they pick a date, and it's like the end of the world. Like, I remember during the time when I was in college, I remember they had the drive out the Bush regime campaign. And like October 5th was the day. And it's like, now is the beginning of the end of the Bush regime. Sell your house, sell your car, quit your job. Now is the end. October 5th will be the first day of the revolution. I mean, it was like they get kind of into this worked up frenzy. And Avakian, we saw this, so around the oil workers strike, he kind of got everybody into this worked up frenzy. Like, this is the moment, and thousands of young people from around the country went to Richmond, California. And he took out ads in like the Guardian newspaper and stuff. And it was like, we are going to go to Richmond, California, and we are going to merge the radical movement with these striking oil workers. And then, you have to remember at the time there were the Weathermen, the Weather Underground or whatever, Bernadine Dorn, Bill Ayers, people like that. And they were saying the white working class were honkies. What was the term they said? honky pigs, evil honky pigs, or something like that. And they had the attitude that most white people were not revolutionary. The white working class, it was the same stuff with settlers now. Like, the white working class are not revolutionary. The white working class are a bunch of squares. And their line was that white middle class young people should start to side with the black people, and there'd be a global revolution. But they wrote off the white working class. So Avakian's group, which started calling itself the Bay Area Revolutionary Union, eventually the Revolutionary Union, their polemic with the Weathermen and with most of the hippie kind of left was that they actually wanted to organize white workers, right? They had the attitude that they were going to align with the Black Panthers. Eventually, they were going to merge with the Black Panthers into one revolutionary party, and then they were going to organize white workers. And there was, within Students for a Democratic Society, there had been three divisions. There had been the Progressive Labor Party, which said that, which didn't support the Vietnamese, which said the Black Panthers were black fascists. And so there was the Progressive Labor Party, and then there was the Revolutionary Youth Movement, which was the Weathermen, which supported the Black Panthers, but said the white working class was not revolutionary. It was like kind of third worldist revolutionaries. So then Avakian's grouping, Bay Area Revolutionary Union or whatever, they broke away from the Revolutionary Youth Movement. They had Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, right? And most of the groups you can call the new communist movement, like the October League, the Communist Workers' Party, they all broke away from that faction, right? Revolutionary Youth Movement 2. And Bay Area Revolutionary Union, that was Bob Avakian's group. There was a professor who was in it for a while, a guy named Bruce Franklin. And he was very charismatic, and he had written like a compendium of Stalin's writings, and he was a teacher at Sanford, and he'd been encouraging his students to go out and protest and such, and he'd eventually been fired, had a trial and been fired despite being a tenured professor, been removed from his professorship at tenure at Stanford, and and then eventually he broke away to form a group called Venceremos, which was like pro-Cuba. And in 1975, the RCP declared itself to be the party, right? They got some people from the Black Workers Congress, they got some people from the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Workers Organization or whatever, and they got the RCP, and they all merged together, and they announced they were the Revolutionary Communist Party, and that they were the new Communist Party. And they were known. It's interesting. You wouldn't know this if you see their stuff now. You would not know this, but in the 70s. They took the workerism, right? The support for like the working class to some ridiculous extremes. Like, they had a rule that you had to listen to country music, right? They had a rule that you had to get married, right? Because it was more working class. They were known for being very homophobic. They had a reputation for being very, very, very anti-gay. And they were just this kind of like, that was the attitude is that, and they would introduce themselves, you'd go to a left-wing meeting, and the people from, one group would say, I'm with the Socialist Workers' Party, and someone else would say, I'm with the Progressive Labor Party, and someone else would say, I'm just an ordinary working man, and that would be the Revolutionary Communist Party, because they played up that workerism. And it's funny, because in Bob Avakian's memoir, there's an anecdote that I guess he said it was very hard for him to follow the party line and like country music. So he got into Jimmy Buffett. Kid you not. He says that he went to a Jimmy Buffett concert. And all these people were smoking weed. And of course, the RCP, they had a rule, you're not allowed to smoke weed. And so, but he saw that these young people were liking Jimmy Buffett's music, and they were all smoking weed. And that made him think that maybe supporting the backwardness of white workers wasn't correct. And the RCP in those days kind of, they took the what you might call like this workerism to some rather extremes. Like, for example, in Boston, right, there were riots against busing, right? In Boston, they were integrating the schools, right, and they started having they started busing students from black neighborhoods to go to school in white neighborhoods, students from white neighborhoods, and the idea was to give equal education, to integrate schools. And of course, a lot of racist white people bombed school buses, and there's a famous photograph of somebody with a flagpole attacking somebody, and there was this racist riot, and the RCP actually published the front page of one of their newspapers was "Smash Busing," and they thought, because this is a working class movement, we can go and recruit from it. From what I understand, the RCP also in West Virginia around the same time, they had school textbooks that promoted Darwin's theory of evolution. They had school textbooks that quoted Malcolm X, and of course there was a fundamentalist Christian and right wing opposition to that. And the RCP, they kind of supported it. They didn't exactly support it, but they would go to those protests against the school textbooks, and it was like they had this idea that, well, if workers are doing it, right, well, we're going to recruit. And it was, I mean, it's in a way, it's a better mistake to make. Okay, I'll give you that, right? I mean, supporting racism, okay, not okay, but but the textbook, I mean, it's like on the one hand, they they seemed to get that the hippie thing and the counterculture wasn't revolutionary. They were trying, in their own messed up, kind of sloppy way, to get to the masses, to get out of the movement and get to the masses. They were trying to do that, okay? I don't forgive them for the busing stuff. I don't forgive them for the textbook riots, but at least on some level, they had the consciousness to realize that the broad masses of people make a revolution, not hippies, not the middle class students. So I give them credit for that, okay? I give them credit for that, and that the new communist movement is a tragedy. It really is. You read about the new communist movement, it's really a tragedy because there are all these people that are doing what you're supposed to do. They're getting jobs in factories, they're going to working class neighborhoods, and they're trying to talk to ordinary people about communism, right? And they're not in this movement bubble. They're trying to get to the masses, but the US economy is still so strong. You have such a big labor aristocracy. The US working class is still so right wing. US society is still so well intact. Capitalism hasn't come apart yet. It just doesn't work. And it's a tragedy. And it was the same story for the Communist Workers' Party and the October League and all the different groups that were doing that. So I give the RCP credit. I mean, I don't approve of them joining the busing stuff. I don't approve of that. I don't approve of them, with the textbook riots. But at least on some level, they knew that the new left was fake. They knew that the new left was bullshit, and they were trying to get to the masses. It didn't work. So then, China obviously changed. There was Deng Xiaoping and all of that. In 1976, the RCP had a rally against the bicentennial celebration in Philadelphia called "We've Carried the Rich for 200 Years. Now let's dump them off our backs." And it was a massive rally. I mean, it was like thousands of people marched basically behind a communist banner, right? And there's a very famous photograph that comes out of that march where you see a bunch of veterans that have a sign that says, "We won't fight another rich man's war," a bunch of Vietnam veterans and the RCP recruited heavily out of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, the VVAW. So the RCP in the 70s, they were significant. I mean, we're talking 6,000 people. I mean, it was a big group. Avakian was the chairman, but there were other big names in it. There was a guy named Label Bergman, who had been the leader of the Communist Party USA of Montana and was had gone to China a bunch and was a sympathizer with China. There were a lot of, it was a massive group. But then when China's politics started shifting, when you had the death of Mao, the rise of Deng Xiaoping in China, the group became divided. And the other thing about the group was that the question was, would they build community organizations? It wasn't working. They were trying to go into working class neighborhoods, recruit people to being communists, build something like what CPUSA had been in the 1930s. And it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. So what were they going to do? So they split. They had a split. They had a pretty ugly split. And the split came down between the people who became the Revolutionary Workers Headquarters, a guy named Mickey Jarvis. Those folks, they formed the Revolutionary Worker Headquarters. And the RCP became the folks that were with Avakian. And that split got particularly ugly. There were fist fights, from what I understand. There were altercations. It got to be a pretty ugly split. But after that, we're talking 1979, the RCP kind of went crazy. At least that's how it looked to most people, from what I've read. So, of course, this is all before my time. I'm just talking about what's out there, what I've read. And I've researched this stuff, right? 1979, you have the Iranian hostage crisis, right? Where, the Iranians seize their embassy. And so all over the USA, you have all these protests against Iran that are taking place, and Americans are gathering, they're burning Iranian flags, they had T-shirts that say Iran sucks, and it was like this kind of pro-military mobilization of the population to hate Iran, right? So at that point, the RCP, they start going to those rallies and burning the American flag and chanting, "It's not our embassy, it's not our embassy," and getting their asses kicked. I mean, mobs of angry right-wing people would just kick their ass. And it seemed like that was, but then they kind of felt like that was a good thing to do, to, like, and some of there's some of the pamphlets where it's like Avakian is saying to them, it's an honor to be spit on by the workers. And they seem to be just kind of setting themselves up for ridicule and for physical violence. When Deng Xiaoping speaks, meets with Jimmy Carter at the White House, they have a rally, "Death to Deng Xiaoping." And hundreds of their members are arrested. They get to the White House. It becomes a joint rally, basically. I mean, not really. I mean, it's their own rally, but they get to the White House, and the Tibet separatists are already there. It's a lot of their members are arrested, and that's particularly ugly. And Avakian's charged. He's facing all these criminal charges. Eventually they have, they have May Day 1980, right? And that's, they announced that the RCP is going to lead a general strike on May 1st, 1980. Of course, the RCP is, I mean, how big is the RCP, right? It's, at that point, how big is it? I mean, it's lost most of its members. About 1,000 or 2,000 people are going to lead a general strike, and they have T-shirts, "I won't work, will you?" And, they've got the May Day brigades, and they go into factories with big red flags. They march into factories with big red flags, and of course get beaten up by the workers in those factories and injured. A member of their group is killed. They go to the Alamo in Texas. They tear down the American flag and put up a red flag. And then a couple days later, the guy who does it, Damian Garcia, is murdered. He's shot down. And they just kind of, they get into this overdrive. And again, most of what they do is they're putting themselves into situations where there's crowds of very patriotic right-wing Americans beating them up, and it's like martyrdom, right? Like they're trying to become martyrs, and it's very odd. And that's kind of what the RCP does. After that, Avakian goes into exile. The RCP basically comes out with this theory that they declare that most workers in the United States are what they call bourgeoisified. Right? And they declare that only what they call the lumpen proletariat, which is like low-income African-American folks, only those folks, are revolutionary. And that the broad masses of white workers are bourgeoisified, and that, they did a lot of they still do a lot of police brutality work. And there's been some more splits. I know, for a while there was a guy who was like the editor of their newspaper for years, named Mike Eli, and he formed something called Kazama Project, and a whole bunch of people left. I forget when that was. That was like in the early 2000 or like mid 2000, like 2010, about that time. And I mean, it's very. I think at this point they don't have much left. I mean, a lot of their bookstores have closed down. Avakian's getting older, and they're very dedicated to building, kind of a cult of personality around Bob Avakian, right? I mean, they call it a culture of appreciation of Bob Avakian, and I mean, you talk to them, one thing that they don't think about economics, right? They have this guy Raymond Latta who's supposed to be their economist, but they really, as far as they're concerned, like, the Soviet Union became capitalist after Stalin's death. China became capitalist after Mao's death, and they're about being revolutionary. They're about feeling revolutionary. They're about, and they use profanity a lot. That's one of their staples, is every other word is fuck, 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 fuck. They're known to use profanity. They actually, in the 80s, they burned the American flag, and they took it to the Supreme Court. And it was a member of the RCP, Gregory Johnson, lit the American flag on fire at the Republican convention, got a 2-year prison sentence for doing so, took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually, in Johnson versus Texas, overturned the ruling against flag burning. And so, and there was an RCP woman in Cleveland who did 2 years in jail for burning the American flag even after that, because they said it was a provocation, that by burning the American flag, she, incited violence. And so they gave her 2 years in jail, even though the Supreme Court had ruled it was okay. And she was eventually freed from jail after, some court rulings. So, they were known for, it was very much, and it's funny because the RCP had been formed in the 70s, in the early 70s, in opposition to the Weathermen, right? The Weathermen were known for going out and trying to be martyrs, for that street fighting, adventurism, and that feeling that white workers are the enemy. and that the white workers are the enemy, but we're going to be the good white people. We're going to be we're going to be martyrs. We're going to sacrifice ourselves in the middle of empire. The USA is Nazi Germany, and we're Sophie Scholl. That kind of mentality, where it's like average Americans are the enemy because they're complicit in empire. That's really big with like new left groups. That's a new left mentality. This kind of moralism, like I'm a good person, but America is evil. I live in an evil country. That kind of mindset, right? And the RCP had been formed by people who didn't agree with that, right? They wanted to get to the workers. But by like the 80s, they were basically back in that mindset. They weren't doing things like the Weathermen did. They certainly were never doing anything like that. They led peaceful protests and such, but they had kind of gotten back into that mentality, and they were getting themselves beaten up and getting injured, and they're hostile to any existing socialism. They don't support Cuba. They certainly don't support modern China. And it's kind of sad. But they're a new left grouping, right? Avakian, I mean, Bob Avakian is Mr. New Left. I mean, this is the guy who was part of the free speech movement in Berkeley, big name in Berkeley, big promoter for the Black Panthers, I mean, Maoists. I mean, they worked for Ramparts magazine. I mean, they are a new left sect, basically. They are a new left sect. And it's Avakian's little group. And they're very, the way they operate, I don't want to say too much more, but the way they operate is, they're very, very paranoid. People like to make fun of them. What? Yeah. They're very, very paranoid. And yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, they're very paranoid, and I don't know. They're kind of, I used to joke that there's like a Monty Python sketch where four guys are in a room, and it's called The Non-Illegal Robbery. And four guys are in a room, and they're like, all right, so you go to the store. You go to the counter. You pay for the watch. You leave. And the one guy's like, well, why are we paying for the watch? Well, they wouldn't give it to us if we didn't pay for it. And it's kind of like, the RCP, it's, they really like, they're looking over their shoulder all the time, and they're getting together to talk about selling newspapers at a rally, and it's kind of sad, but what they've been through, I'm sure they've been through over the decades. They've seen some stuff, and yeah, I mean, you asked me what I thought of the RCP. I mean, it's just kind of a remnant of a time past, right? They don't do much economic agitation. Their focus is on, they talk about racism, they talk about police brutality. Their ideas are pretty simple. It's kind of like the government is evil, it engages in violence around the world, it oppresses black people. When we take over, when we come to power, and they love to talk that way, when we come to power, when we fucking come to power, man, when we fucking come to power, it's going to be different. I mean, it's an ultra-left grouping, and a lot of F-bombs, a lot of violent rhetoric, I guess. I mean, they're not doing anything illegal, but their rhetoric is kind of, there's a lot of like revolution and, guns on t-shirts and stuff like that. It's an ultra-left group. I mean, they're ultra-leftists. I mean, that's all you can really say about it. They got, Bob Avakian, he talks for 14 hours in DVDs. He's got 14-hour DVDs where he talks about everything, and I mean, it's, it is what it is. That's the RCP. It's a big deal, though. They're probably the most visible communists in the United States. I mean, they have bookstores, they wave red flags, they sell their newspaper everywhere. And so, despite the fact people are saying they're irrelevant, and I would agree, I mean, not exactly. Their police brutality work is somewhat relevant. They played a very big role in Black Lives Matter. But other than that, they're not, I mean, they're very visible, and a lot of people see them and see their very simplistic ideas, right? Think that's what a communist is. I mean, and they get very angry with you. Like, one of their talking points that they argue, like, why you need to have a total revolution is they'll say, well, under capitalism, there's no right to eat. Right? And they have this whole tirade. Well, if under capitalism they declared a right to eat, anyone could just go to a store and take food. And the stores would go out of business, the economy would collapse, so therefore you need a revolution. And so if you say to an RCPer, what about food stamps? They look at you like, I mean, that's not an argument against capitalism. You say, okay, so what if the government nationalized all food and gave food for free? Would that be socialism? And all the other things would be I mean, it's like, it's not an argument. And they have a lot of, it's kind of like, they're always like, we're for an actual revolution, we're for a real revolution, get down with the revolution, man. But it's not very well thought out. It's just kind of like, I don't know. It's not very well thought out. The government is evil. We need to overthrow the government. The government is corrupt. Revolution, man, get down with the revolution. Um, yeah, I mean, it's not very well thought out. You look at their older literature from the 70s, it has depth to it. And actually, I mean, you read even Avakian's stuff. Avakian, when he founded the RCP, he gave a very good speech called, it was called Our Class Will Free Itself and All Mankind. It's a very well written speech. It's very basic Marxism, right? I mean, it's well explained. It's very clear. Look at what he publishes now with the big run on sentences, and what he writes now is largely incoherent. What he wrote back then made sense. Didn't agree with it. It was anti-Soviet. It was, it was not my view necessarily, but it was coherent. It made sense. So enough about the RCP. It's something I like to talk about because I've observed them for years. I've thought a lot about them. I've been perplexed by them. So thanks for asking. But I have 2 super chats I should get to. Bum, bum, bum. So I was asked, did Yugoslavia deserve France's seat on the UN Security Council? I've never thought about that. I mean, Yugoslavia certainly played a heroic role in defeating the Nazis during the Second World War. And, France was occupied for most of the war. Their government fell very quickly. So I could see an argument as to why that might be the case. And it is kind of, I mean, the UN Security Council is not fair. I mean, the fact that China was locked out of it for so many years, even though, and had Taiwan and this tiny island representing them, that's not right. Yeah, I mean, I could see an argument for that. Okay, America's failure. Will America's failure to help other countries during coronavirus cause China to expand? I was asked, and I think yes. I think it absolutely will. China's playing the role. The USA used to present itself as the country that, goes around the world helping everybody. Everyone depends on the United States. Well, now, amid this pandemic, the United States is depending on other people. We can't keep our shit together. And China is going around the world helping people with the Health Silk Road and all that they're doing. I can see that. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. What else is on people's minds? Again, not much on my mind. We can keep talking. I mean, my apologies to any RCP people if they're watching this. I'm sorry. I'm just giving my view. I'm sure you can represent your view far better than I. Feel free to write a polemic or disagree with me. I mean you no harm. But yeah, there you go. What else is on people's minds? I answered those 2 super chats. I'll talk about whatever people want. Someone said Gray Zone put out something on the left. I should check it out. I should. I didn't know they did that. That's amusing. Yeah. I'll have to check it out. I generally like their stuff. I generally like Gray Zone stuff. They generally put out good material. I'm a fan. What else is new, folks? Anything else? I'm not in any rush to get any place. I know it's late, folks, but hey, I'm still here, right? You need to debate Kyle Kalinske. I'd love that. Again, I'd love that. People, will you go on Red Scare podcast? Sure. Yeah. What kind of podcast is that? Send me a message, information. I'd be happy to go on it. There you go. Yeah. It's 1 a.m., says Lady Ravenhair. You've been talking for 2 hours. Yep. But it's Corona time. I'm doing what I have. You have, if you have to go to bed, go to bed. But I'm just sitting here. Yeah, there you go. Rank your favorite boroughs in New York City. That's funny. Well, it's funny because I've only ever lived in Brooklyn, where I currently live, and in Queens, where I live now, or where I used to live. I never have lived in Manhattan, never lived in the Bronx, so I can't really rate them. I rarely get to the Bronx, I will say. It's pretty far out there. I get to Queens every so often, and I live in Brooklyn, and Manhattan is where I work. So when I'm not, Corona streaming, I live in Manhattan. So there you go. Yeah. I was out in the neighborhood today, and what I saw, I was going for a run. I decided I'm going to start running every day. I'm going to do some jogging and go out running every day to try and burn off excess energy. And one thing that I noticed is that so many restaurants are open with no seating, and like the door is wide open, and they've got signs like cheap food. Like they're desperate. These restaurants are open. You can't sit there, right? But you can take out food, and they want your business. And I was surprised to see that. I assumed that most restaurants would just be closed down. Almost all the restaurants are open with takeout only, with big signs out front offering deals. They're desperate, right? And think about it. There's a lot of like small restaurants in my neighborhood in Brooklyn that are not chains, and those people must be getting hammered. If you're a small restaurant owner, you must be getting hammered right now. So I saw that. The other thing is I went to the drugstore, and a lot of the shelves were empty. A lot of products were not on the walls there. I will say that. It wasn't like famine or anything, but like I saw a lot of empty space on the shelves in the drugstores. That's not good. But there you go. Yeah, I bet you could have a dialectical conversation with Kyle, actually. Well, thanks. Yeah. Converting people to socialism is easier during a crisis, but most people are self-isolating now. What actions can we do to reach out? Well, that's why I'm on here right now. That's why I'm on here. And I want to build the CPI. When is the CPI going to happen? Good question. I mean, as soon as... What is the likelihood of I'm sorry, can someone repeat that? The likelihood of a multipolar world? I couldn't read the whole thing, and I want to make sure everyone gets their question answered. But yeah, I mean, we need to be on here as much as we can educating people about socialism. I'm writing this book on the synthetic left. That's really important, I think. So I'm definitely doing that, and I'm doing these kind of conversations. But we need to do this. The CPI conference is, or in the U.S. hegemony really in crisis or transition. Okay. Is the multipolar world order really in a crisis or transition? Yeah, I think it is. We're seeing at this point. I don't see how you can look at just the situation as it is today and think Russia and China are on their way out. Russia and China are rising, and the West is in a chaos. Now, my hope is that here in the United States we won't decline, right? But our relationship with the world will change. I would like to see the United States grow more prosperous, but grow more prosperous by having a relationship with the world based on win-win cooperation. I would like to see an end to global imperialism. And I would like instead to see, a new global economic order based on win-win cooperation, countries trading with each other for mutual benefit. Could you talk about the fight ahead against further attacks on the working class during the pandemic and after and the way forward? Well, that's the thing. People are already talking. I don't know if people saw the interview I did yesterday with this young man, Sean Rosellis from the Communist Party. We are going to have to start feeding people. We are going to have to start running charity programs. We're going to have to start taking care of people and giving people community service. That's why I'm excited about CPI, right? And as soon as we can start having public gatherings again, we're going to launch the CPI. We're going to have conferences on the East Coast and the West Coast. We're going to have retreats, I think, where we get together and start functioning, and we're going to talk about, at this point, people are going to be hungry and they're going to need food. And the unemployment councils of the 1930s, read about that and what they did. At this point, the time has come to help our class, to help our working class brothers and sisters. People are suffering right now, and just rhetoric isn't going to do it. Right now, we're kind of stuck indoors, but we're going to have to hit the ground running and start just feeding and educating people and taking care of people. This election is not going to give expression to the feelings that are beneath the surface. Most of the people who will vote for Joe Biden will want free healthcare, will want free education, will want socialism, and instead they will vote for Joe Biden. CPI is the Center for Political Innovation, which is the organization, or the think tank that I'm building to try and educate people about socialism. And we need to kick it off. We need to hit the ground running. This pandemic kind of threw a monkey wrench in the wheels. It was supposed to be April 18th. We had our launch conference. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think we can get going, and I think there's an appetite for it more than ever. The main thing, though, is I would encourage people. We want to get to the masses, but also, people are asking me about the DSA and stuff. My feeling is that most people at this point are open, and that there's no reason to start some kind of sectarian shit war. My feeling is that we need people in the DSA who are anti-imperialist. We need people in the DSA that are progressive, pushing an anti-imperialist and revolutionary line. And as long as DSA will allow those people to be there and doesn't ban them, I think they should be there. And I think it's good for then other people that might join DSA to become acquainted with those politics. Absolutely. And I think it would be very good for, for people that are in the DSA, to hear these kind of politics. And, people always say to me, well, Caleb, why don't you form a new party? Well, I don't feel like any of the parties in the United States are really worthy of the name. And a think tank is something that can put out political literature, that can host different conferences and different ideas, can kind of can kind of influence a milieu of people and put out political thought, but it's not competing. It's not like my party is better than your party. You should join this party, not that party. I know people that are in the Communist Party. I know people that are in the Socialist Party. I know people that are in different groups, and that's great. And I'm not interested in playing that game where it's like my party's bigger than your party. I'm interested in influencing people. I'm interested in spreading socialist and Marxist ideas. And we absolutely need to get our apparatus of distribution in the works. I am writing this book, The Synthetic Left and the Future of Socialism. It's almost done. Some people are helping me, go over it, giving me their views, proofreaders and such, but it'll be out soon. And when it's out, you're all going to love it because I'm drawing from all the knowledge of all the things we talk about on here. They follow what I've written. So, yeah, I guess it's Lenin's birthday now. It's also Earth Day, right? Let's remember the first Earth Day was declared to compete with Lenin's 100th birthday. The first Earth Day was in 1970 on the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth. And so it's Lenin's birthday. Happy birthday, Lenin. But it's also Earth Day, which was invented to distract from it, I think. What else is on people's minds? Anything else? Anything else, folks? Thoughts on Enver Hoxha's criticism of Mao? Ooh, interesting one. Well, the book that Enver Hoxha wrote criticizing Mao is called Imperialism and the Revolution. And it was published in like 1978, 79. And it was Albania's denunciation. And there's even a chapter in it. I kid you not. What language do you wish you had learned as a kid? Spanish. That's easy. But yeah, I mean, language education here in the United States is a joke. It's a crime. I mean, other countries, people get good education. But Enver Hoxha's criticism of Mao, there's, imperialism and the revolution. It actually has a section called Mao Zedong Thought and Anti-Marxist Theory. It's a little bit over the top, I would say. One of the things it points out, though, is that the workerism is kind of missing in Maoism, right? That Mao, he's all about the peasantry, he's all about the students, but the Marxist focus on workers, right? Factory workers being exploited by their bosses, class struggle. There is a kind of utopianism in Mao, and especially, that book is more a criticism not of Mao himself, it's more a criticism of the Gang of Four, right? The Gang of Four, you have to remember, so Albania, right, 1961, the Soviet Union and China had their falling out. The only country, Cuba was neutral, North Korea was neutral, but the only country that like fully went down, solidly 100% with China was Albania. And Albania was aligned with China through the Cultural Revolution. They had their own Cultural Revolution, they called it, where they cracked down on, where they cracked down on religion, and that Albania, was aligned with China during the Cultural Revolution. And that book, Imperialism and the Revolution, where Enver Hoxha goes after Mao Zedong, it's a repudiation of the Gang of Four. And one of the criticisms they raise, which I think is valid, is that during the Gang of Four period, there was kind of a watering down, a lack of interest in workers and bosses and economics. And that's kind of the criticism I raised about the RCP. And I'll answer that, Lance plays. That's kind of the answer that about the RCP is it becomes about, well, we're trying to end exploitation. We're for the revolution, but the economics of these things, the workers and the bosses, that kind of gets lost. And you can see that. You can totally see that with the Gang of Four and with the Maoist groups now that exist, right? I mean, that they just keep talking a lot about that. So what kind of socialist? I call myself a 21st century socialist, right? I'm not a Maoist. I'm certainly not a Trotskyist. I'm not a Stalinist. I'm not a Castroist. I'm not a Bolivarian. I think we should study all of these figures, but blindly follow none of them. Right? There's plenty that we can learn, but we shouldn't be dogmatically following any of them. We should be studying the socialism that exists in the world today, seeing what we can learn from it, studying the socialist revolutions of the past. That includes anarchism, that includes social democracy, anything we can learn from, and applying it to our own conditions. I am an advocate of 21st century socialism, and I draw heavily from Marx, from Lenin, from other leaders. But that's how I see things. That's my worldview. And I again, you know, eventually we should be moving toward socialism with American characteristics, a socialism rooted in our own country and the contradictions here, developing a political formula that will work, right? Sal North says one of the big problems with communist parties in the US today is that they've stagnated ideologically, completely. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Still in Brooklyn? What possibilities do you see for yourself and your generation? Well, I would like to see the Center for Political Innovation vastly expand. I would like to see it become a very, very well-known operation that, everywhere you go in circles, people are reading our books and listening to our ideas about socialism. We are kind of blazing trail. We are one of the main voices, kind of forging ahead socialist thought in the United States. I've always been happy in New York City. I mean, I can't imagine living anywhere else, honestly. I really like New York City. It's just, moving here was like the best decision I ever made. This place has an energy to it that just matches my energy. I'm a go type of person. I've had roommates before who can't stand that about me. They just say, he never calms down. I'm a go type of person. This is a go type of city. I will say, I want to get out to the West Coast. I really want to get out to the West Coast. It has like a relaxing kind of vibe to it that I like. It would be great. I'm thinking, who knows? Maybe it'll be possible I could have a vacation in California at some point. That would be nice. Because I just really like California. Every time I go out there, I enjoy it. But yeah, my vision is I hope that 5 years from now, CPI is a mass organization that is spreading socialist views everywhere, and people are studying and reading these ideas. And yeah, I'll need your help to do it. I'll need all of your help to do it. We're kind of frozen at the moment, but I see so many people excited about doing it. I'm excited about doing it. We have the beginning of something special because what we are offering is very, very, very unique. I will attend your first meeting of CPI. When I was in NYC, I just wanted to get out, but then this was now. Yeah, well, thank you, Kinky, and I understand. I'm bummed about it, but the hotel has been very friendly. They told us we can use our down payment for another date, so it's just a matter of setting a new date, and we want to set a date that gives us time to promote the new date. Most people that we're going to fly in, they've been able to get reimbursed on their flights, and once we have the new date and we get confirmed speakers and all of that, we announce the new date and we go and do it. We do it just like we were going to do it before. We have to figure out how it's going to work with the conventions, right? We don't want it to be during the conventions because I have to be covering the conventions. So, I cannot blame all of the attacking in Vietnam in '79 on the Gang of Four. There must be more. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, okay, I don't quite get what he's getting at there, but yeah, I mean, Enver Hoxha's criticism of China, some of it is valid, some of it, would you consider visiting? Absolutely, I would love to go to Australia. I would love to come to Australia. And in fact, I've traveled around the world. There are many, countries around the world where I've been invited to give a talk or a lecture. I know many people want me to come to the UK and give a talk. People want me to come to Australia. If you want me to come to Australia, let's make it happen. I would love to go to Australia and give a presentation, speak to student groups. It's interesting. I've wondered why I have so many fans from Australia. There are many English-speaking countries in the world, but for some reason, I continue to meet people from Australia who like my work, and that's great. I like Australia. It's nice. I've never been there. Everyone I've ever met from Australia is very, very friendly. In fact, there's a lot of tourists from Australia in New York City, or there has been, because I know it's because your currency is doing very well. But yeah, Australia, it's got an interesting culture to it. I'd love to visit Australia. I'd love to go down under, as they call it. So I hope that answers your question. I'd love to go to Australia. Let's make it happen, David. Let's make it happen. I would love that. There you go. How do you finance CPI? We're going to need support. I mean, I've been getting money from some donors and stuff, but we need more. I mean, we don't have anywhere near the money we need to actually do what we can do. So there you go. I believe we can organize it. It'll be next year most likely, says David. Great. I would love to go to Australia. That would be a lot of fun. Uh, all right. Liberals are destroying Australia, says Dante Solano. I was a tourist in NYC a couple of years ago, Simon. Well, maybe I ran into you. I doubt it because we'd probably remember that. But yeah, I ran into Australian tourists in New York City almost like every day. It was kind of amazing. In Australia, they call women Sheilas. Do they? I didn't know that. I never knew that. There's a lot of things about Australia I don't know. From what I understand, like around the time I was born, there was kind of an Australian craze in the United States. There was the movie Crocodile Dundee, like that's a knife, and it was like there was like kind of a fascination with Australia in the United States. But I was a baby, so I didn't go through that, right? But it was kind of a big thing. I will say that the movie Australia, I mean, no disrespect to Hugh Jackman, but the movie Australia. I mean, I remember I went to see that in college, and I was just like, "Oh my goodness!" It thought it was an epic movie. Nicole Kidman, and it was like something else, man. I went to that movie, and it was like it thought it was like Gone with the Wind or like some kind of epic, Grapes of Wrath or Titanic or something, and it was like I was sitting there and I was like, "Are you serious?" Like, it was awful. There's a little indigenous boy throughout the movie who's following Nicole Kidman around, and he keeps saying, "Mrs. Boss, Mrs. Boss, Mrs. Boss." And I thought, how is that not like the most racist thing I've ever seen? Mrs. Boss, Mrs. Boss. And Hugh Jackman is, he's a character who doesn't have a name, but he's the drover, and it's like at one point they ask him, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Droving." Of course, he's the drover. What else would he do? I don't know. And oh gosh, I mean, it was bad. It was a bad movie. What else? I mean, I don't know. I just remember that, and I remember there were the German professor at my college looked just like the German bad guy in the movie, and so I kept like laughing about that throughout the movie. I guess towards the end of the movie, it's like they're getting to some city. They have to cross the outback to get to some city. They finally get to the city, and then the Japanese bomb it, and it's like epic. And then they go and see the movie Wizard of Oz or something, and it was just a bad movie. And Nicole Kidman is this wealthy woman, and Hugh Jackman is this rough and tough outdoorsman or whatever, and they have to travel together even though they don't like each other. And it thought it was epic. So many like landscape shots, and I mean, it really was trying to be like Titanic or something, and it was just cringe. It was just a cringe movie. It was a bad movie, very bad movie. I don't know why they did that. I think I know Nicole Kidman and both Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman are both from Australia, and I think they were trying to like it was like promotional, like more tourism, but it didn't help. It really didn't help. Now Mel Gibson is from Australia too. So that's interesting, right? But I guess he wasn't involved. He was still at that point, I mean, I guess now he's been kind of rehabilitated, Mel Gibson, but he was still at that point blacklisted over his anti-Semitic comments. But you know, yeah. What else? Yeah, Australia. Wow. Oh, Gibson was born in the United States. Someone's telling me. Oh, there you go. I didn't know that. I know that Mel Gibson is one of these like old order Catholics, I believe. Like his father is, and he's one of these like these Catholics who reject Vatican II, and that's why his father denies the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism. And it's like it's he comes out of that. They're like traditionalist Catholics or whatever. Yeah, I remember when Passion of the Christ came out, actually. It was the same summer. It was the 2004 election, which was the first election that I was like really intensely involved in. I really hated George Bush. I really hated the war, and I was in this very, very conservative town. And so I remember that. And it was like, I think Pat Buchanan said that the election that year was Michael Moore versus Mel Gibson. But what was interesting was but if you look at it, like, Mel Gibson with Passion of the Christ, it was widely condemned for being anti-Semitic, the movie, and it was, it was very violent. It was the martyrdom, the killing of Jesus, and, the crucifixion story, very gory movie and very bloody and then, there was that, and then there was the, Michael Moore's movie, Fahrenheit 9/11, which was, very critical of the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, very critical of the class structure in the United States and racism and how the working class is sent to die in the wars of the rich, and kind of exposing the big corporations. And it was like both of those movies were not really movies that the mainstream American ruling class wanted to promote, right? I mean, Mel Gibson was going back to this medieval, like he was making, it was called The Passion of the Christ. It was like a passion play, right? He was going back to some medieval, Catholic, almost like even vaguely kind of anti-capitalist in this right-wing traditionalist way. It was like far right. It was very far right. And he did that. And then at the same time, Michael Moore's movie was kind of social democratic and Marxist-y, right? And it was like we were seeing the beginning of Bonapartism in the United States. It was pretty clear the Bush administration had made a lot of people angry, right? Um, and that it was like there were two wings of the ruling class that were fighting. Bush and Kerry represented different wings of the ruling class, but in order to exude the kind of fanaticism from the population that they wanted, they both had to tamper with ideas that were outside of the establishment. Like you'll remember that like Fahrenheit 9/11, it won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in France, right? It's standing ovation for hours. Like that movie was like worshipped by Europe, right? And you'll have to remember like Barack Obama campaigned where in Berlin. And that John Kerry's whole platform, his critique of the war was that Bush had done it without the support of France and other countries. And it was like there was like a more pro-European wing of American capitalism that didn't quite approve of Bush, right? And they talk about the Eastern establishment and all of that. Whereas, Bush, and the neocons, they were tied in with the evangelicals and with the religious crowd. It was very wild. I remember when Passion of the Christ came out, at my school, there was a lot of, I was in the school play that year. And I remember, it was, even though it was a public school, right? Public institutions in the United States are not allowed to have religion. Not allowed, right? But, it was like, I remember I was in the school play. And before the school play started, I remember we all had to, like, join hands and pray before the school play. And, like, before a couple of the kids there had seen the Passion of the Christ that day. So before they, I mean, we're all just like, dear God, help us go out and do a good play performance tonight, and, drama club or whatever. But it was like two of the kids had actually seen the Passion of the Christ that day. So it was like, Christ, I saw what you went through today at the movie theater. And then we had to, it was a bit much. I mean, the religion that I heard, I mean, it was just constant religion in my small town, and I didn't get that because in my small town, it was constant. We prayed in school all the time. Ministers came in to deliver the Thanksgiving message. There were two prayers, not just one prayer. There was an opening prayer and a closing prayer at my graduation. Constant praying in school, constant religion everywhere. But at the same time, these people had it in their minds they were persecuted. Oh my God, I'm going to get arrested. They jail people for praying in school. They don't jail people for praying in school. It was like we're persecuted, but we're everywhere, and that drove me up the wall. I mean, I don't think I've ever been as anti-religious as I was when I was in high school because these people drove me up the wall because my family, we were mainline Protestants. We were not fundamentalists. We didn't believe the Bible was literally absolutely 100% literally true. We accepted Darwin's theory of evolution. We were my parents voted for Democrats, and I was in this town full of people that were like evangelicals, and it was like everything had to be about religion, everything, like we talk about gay marriage. There was a gay marriage initiative on the ballot, I remember in 2004. It's one of the main reasons Bush was able to win is he got every conservative to the polls to vote against gay marriage. And like you would talk about gay marriage and people would be against gay marriage. Why are you against gay marriage? Well, because our laws come from the Bible, and the Bible says not to be gay. And I said, well, no, our laws do not come from the Bible. Our Constitution explicitly says there will be no establishment of religion. Yeah, but all morals come from the Bible. So therefore, I mean, it was like, no. And, it was wild. I mean, and I would have these arguments with people, and, it was very frustrating. I mean, being taught in school that, well, there are two theories about how life originated. There's, scientific evolution and religious creationism, and it's a path, we each have to choose which one to believe. That's not legal. right? I mean, it's not legal to teach religion in science classes in the United States, but I got plenty of it, and I didn't like it. So yeah, there you go. I mean, in a way, I mean, now that I'm far away from that, I don't, my emotions aren't as intense about it. But I always felt like I was on the outside. And it was, again, it was like at the same time there was this feeling that they were all being persecuted, but yet they dominated everything. I mean, and like, I mean, a lot of the like, I remember every year before school, you'd have like an orientation meeting, right? Like an orientation meeting, like, these are the rules for the new school year, where you go with your parents. And a lot of times those orientation meetings would turn into like right-wing political rallies. Like it was, I mean, not, I mean, that's an exaggeration, obviously, but it was like, and the principal would be up there, we don't allow shirts from, rock bands that have obscenities in them. There's so much out there. Parents need to control, it's like everything turned into kind of a right-wing atmosphere. I mean, I remember in our health class, they showed us like anti-abortion propaganda, right? And like mutilated fetuses and stuff, and like slideshows and that had Bible verses in them about how abortion was bad. And it was just like, it was so, the right-wing politics was just in your face all the time. You couldn't escape it. And it drove me up the wall. I didn't like it. I didn't appreciate it. Um, you know, but there you go. I mean, yeah. What else is on people's minds, folks? You know, it's late night. We're chatting. We're enjoying life. I'll drink some more water. I'll go for a little while longer. Mr. Red says he knows exactly how he feels, grew up in a part of California. Good. I know I'm not the only one, and that's what people don't get, is a lot of people in the urban areas and the cities don't understand that this is a huge country. And there are a lot of small towns like mine that are just like this. What do you think of Spartacus? Very interesting. Spartacus was an ancient Roman who was heroic, right? I mean, he broke the chains of his slavery, went out and fought, you know, great. I mean, yeah, I mean, the ancient Roman slave rebel, revolutionary, Spartacus, great. And it was a huge rebellion, right? The slaves of Rome was a slavery-based empire. It was a backward economic order. They fought for their rights against the empire. I mean, it's definitely admirable, definitely heroic. I mean, that's all I can say about it. What I think is interesting is that the movie Spartacus, it's funny. I started reading about Spartacus when I was like I read about Spartacus. I was attracted to the idea of a slave rebel or something. And so I started reading about him. I read like books about him when I was like fifth, sixth grade. I didn't quite understand it, but I was trying to read about it. It was exciting. And so I remember I went and got the VHS tape of the movie with Kirk Douglas, the Spartacus movie. And I didn't like it. I didn't get it. I mean, it just didn't, I just didn't like it. I mean, I didn't get it. It wasn't until I was in college I watched Spartacus again and I understood it. Right? The Spartacus movie is about ancient Rome, but it was based on a novel by Howard Fast, who was a member of the Communist Party. The screenplay was written by Dalton Trumbo, also a member of the Communist Party. And it's about World War II. Maybe that hits people like a ton of bricks. But if you watch it, so basically the message is that, the slaves are revolting. They've seized territory. And at one point, they show the mountain where the slaves are. And they hold all things in common. It's supposed to be the Soviet Union, right? And then the Roman Empire is a republic. Right? The Roman Empire is a republic, right? And they keep going on about democracy and how great democracy is in ancient Rome. But Marcus Crassus, the general, becomes the dictator and crushes democracy in order to put down the slave revolt. And at one point, it's very obvious what they're saying. Marcus Crassus is supposed to look like Hitler. And he's speaking to a crowd, and he does that Roman salute. And it's pretty clear. There's one scene where it's so obvious Marcus Crassus is the dictator. Right? And he's becoming Hitler. And it's like the ruling class needed fascism in order to crush communist revolution. That's basically the message, right? Is that Spartacus is this, he's this slave who is oppressed and he becomes a gladiator. And instead of, killing other slaves for the pleasure of the Romans, he revolts and he rebels, right? And they're fighting for their rights and they seize territory. and slaves from around the world are flocking to, from around the empire are flocking to them and joining their revolt, and it's brutally put down. But then the way Spartacus's son is able to escape, the wife and kid of Spartacus are able to escape, is one of these Romans who wants to defend the republic, right? Who believes in democracy, is able to help them escape, right? But the whole thing, and what's weird is the Roman Republic didn't fall until much later, right? Until Julius Caesar time, right? This was 73 BC that the Spartacus revolt happened, but the Roman Republic didn't fall, I think, until 43 BC. So it's the Roman Republic doesn't fall, but it's portraying the fall of the Roman Republic, like a military strong man takes power to crush a slave revolt. But that's not historically accurate because it's about World War II. Howard Fast and Dalton Trumbo were both making an argument for World War II. I mean, it was the communist interpretation of World War II and how capitalism sheds democracy. And it's a good movie. I enjoyed it when I was in college. When I was very young and interested in Spartacus because I thought it was swords and exciting. I was very disappointed by it. But it's a good movie. I recommend it. What's interesting is it's anti-gay. There's an anti-gay subplot. Is that Crassus is portrayed as a homosexual, and that's supposed to be a sign that he's evil. Obviously, that's not what would be in movies nowadays. But there's a kind of a subplot where Crassus has this slave who's a poet who performs for him and plays songs for him on the lute. And at one point, Crassus is like naked in the bathhouse, and he starts trying to sexually seduce his slave. And it's supposed to be that Crassus is that evil. He's a homosexual, and that leads to the whole thing, like the fall of Rome is caused by homosexuality and all of that. And it's amusing because nowadays, definitely a left-wing film would never have an anti-gay subplot. But this was 1961, 1962, I think it came out. So, and let's not forget that movie was a really important movie in terms of McCarthyism because Dalton Trumbo wrote it, and he was blacklisted, right? I mean, Dalton Trumbo, he won an Oscar for his movie, The Brave One, but he didn't accept it because he wrote it under another name and he couldn't go accept it, right? It's the only Oscar that's never been accepted. But yet, when McCarthyism was kind of broken, the fact that they made Spartacus, a movie about revolution, a movie with kind of a Marxist subplot, the fact that they made that movie, the fact that John F. Kennedy went to that movie, that was a big deal. John F. Kennedy, all the John Birch Society and Ku Klux Klan, American Legion were protesting that movie. They said this is communist propaganda. There was this huge push from the right wing not to go to the movie. John F. Kennedy went to the movie, right? He had already won the presidential election. It was Christmas time. It was like a Hollywood picture, I believe. And he had already won the election. He wasn't president yet. He hasn't been inaugurated. He went to the movie. And he made a big point of going to this movie. The right wing was furious about it. It was a sign that McCarthyism was broken, that Eastern establishment strategy of détente with the Soviet Union, soft power, it was the beginning of that. And the fact that they made that movie was blatantly political in a way. There's a book called Finks by Joel Whitney, which is about the CIA, and I'm quoting from it inside. It's about the CIA and how they funded, the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the manipulation of arts and stuff. And it talks about CIA involvement in Hollywood. And that, the CIA basically, edited movies during the 1950s and 60s. There were, they didn't do it blatantly, but they would have people that were CIA operatives that were on the board of the movie studios and would push politics into movies. You can read about this. It's public record now. It sounds like crazy conspiracy theories. It's public record that the CIA was trying to manipulate the film trade. The fact that Spartacus was made, that was sending a message to the Soviet Union. I'm sure it was made just because people wanted to go see it, and it was, Howard Fast was a loved writer. Dalton, it was a good movie, and that was the Sword and Sandal, all these movies about Jesus and ancient Rome, that was like popular at the time. Ben-Hur, all that kind of thing. It fit the time, but it was also kind of a message to the Soviet Union. It was a message to the Soviet Union that, look, you would never allow a capitalist propaganda film in the United States, in the Soviet Union, but we here in the USA, we just allowed Dalton Trumbo to make his Spartacus movie, and it was a subtle message to filmmakers in the USSR. Oh, look, in America, we allow people to make politically dissident films. I bet you'd be jailed if you did that in the Soviet Union. It's soft power, right? And we know that's who the West was courting at the Prague Spring, right? And in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, all these places. Um, that's who they were courting. So there you go. That's who they were courting. And so there was a reason they made that movie at the time that they made it. It was kind of serving a subtle political message. The McCarthyism stuff didn't work. The McCarthyism stuff, in a way, strengthened the communists, right? It reinforced the message that they were, so it's different strategies. And the fact that JFK went to the movie, that was no secret. He could have gone to the movie discreetly. He could have not gone to it, but there you go. But yeah, so yeah, there's a bug, right? Whatever. It's embarrassing, right? I mean, it's an old apartment building, summertime, it happens. What else is new, folks? Yeah, I recommend watching Spartacus. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. Kirk Douglas, it's a classic. One funny anecdote that I heard was that, oh, never mind. I agree, message was from the U.S. that we are with you. Right, I think so. It's a drone, Caleb, be careful. Yeah, right, exactly, right. I don't think the drone has to actually be in the apartment. I think it could be like up in the sky listening, right? Or maybe they just watch this live, right? They don't need a drone. They know exactly everything I'm saying. Maybe they're just watching this YouTube live, right? What do you think of the Spartacus TV series? I haven't seen it, Simon. I just haven't seen it. I haven't had the chance. I don't watch TV. My wife wants me to watch TV more, but I have this go personality. It is so hard for me to just sit there and watch television. It's very hard for me to do. I want to be doing something. It's very hard to focus. That's why I like to go to the movies, and I can't do that now because they're closed for the pandemic. I love going to the movies, though. If you go to the movies, it's like the sky is dark, and you can just kind of, just sit there, and it's like your whole attention. And, I love going to the movies. Yeah. But there you go. Yeah, I did see the movie Trumbo. Really liked it. What do you think of the Spartacus League? See, we're doing this like left group gossip tonight. But hey, why not, right? The Spartacus League, right? We did the RCP earlier. Let's do everyone's two favorite ultra-leftist groups. The RCP, we did that. Now, the Spartacus League. Bum, bum, bum. The Spartacus League. Alrighty. So, the Spartacus League is a Trotskyist group. And they Trotskyist groups divide into three categories, right? I talk about, you have what you can call mainline Trotskyists. They think that the socialist countries are deformed workers' states. They emphasize labor unions, right? That's like Socialist Alternative. That's like the U.S. SWP, and they're mainline Trotskyists. You have what you call third camp or neo-Trotskyists that hate all the socialist countries, say they're state capitalist, are based on campuses, are academic. Those are neo-Trotskyists. And then you have this third category, and it's called Orthodox Trotskyists or Ortho-Trotskyists. And those are Trotskyites that are bonkers. And the Spartacus League is probably the most well-known Ortho-Trotskyist group. It started out within the U.S. SWP. So the Trotskyists, the main Trotskyist party in the United States is the Socialist Workers' Party. In the 1940s, 1939, 1940, they kicked out the people who said the Soviet Union was not a deformed workers' state. So they kicked out the neo-Trotskyists. So in the 60s, right, the Communist Party supported Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Little known fact. Well, the Communist Party thought the civil rights movement. 1956, the Communist Party dropped the notion that black people were a nation, and it denounced black nationalism and started supporting the civil rights movement, right? They'd been supporting the civil rights movement for a long time before that, but they'd also been supporters of black nationalism. So 1956, the Communist Party announces they no longer support black nationalism. So the Trotskyists are always trying to position themselves as being more revolutionary than the Communist Party. So how do they do that? Well, they become big supporters of black nationalism. They start supporting Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X spoke at Trotskyite forums. He spoke at the militant labor forums in New York City. That was with the SWP. The Socialist Workers Party would have these big events they called militant labor forums. Well, you can listen. There's audio recordings on the internet of Malcolm X speaking to militant labor forums. It's Trotskyite meetings. And the Socialist Workers Party emphasized that they were big supporters of Malcolm X. Also, 1959, Cuba has a revolution, right? And at first, Cuba says, that it's not a socialist revolution. 1962, Fidel Castro announces they're moving towards socialism. So the Trotskyist Socialist Workers Party announces that that the Cuban Revolution is good and declares the Cuban Revolution are unconscious Trotskyists. Like, you can't make this up. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? They think Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, all these people that are brilliant, well-read, somehow they're Trotskyists, and they don't know it yet. They are unconscious Trotskyists, right? Che Guevara was trying to spread global revolution, so he believed in Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Fidel Castro had started out as just an anti-imperialist and become a socialist. So the Cuban Revolution are unconscious Trotskyists, and they support the permanent revolution, or they support black nationalism, right? And those are two big positions for the U.S. SWP. Those are big positions for them to take, right? Those are not, typical positions. And so within the Socialist Workers' Party, there's a faction that disagrees. There's a faction that disagrees. That faction that disagrees calls itself RT, Revolutionary Tendency. And they say that Fidel Castro is not an unconscious Trotskyist. He's a Stalinist. And they also say that black nationalism is reactionary. They don't support black nationalism. They're for what they call revolutionary integrationalism. And that's the revolutionary tendency. James Robertson is the leader of it. But there's also a guy named Tim Woolforth. And yeah, they're the revolutionary tendency. Eventually, they're kicked out. And they form the Spartacus League, and they have a newspaper called Workers' Vanguard, and it looks exactly the same today. Like, the masthead the headline part of it has not changed since the 1960s, and they're ultra Trotskyists, and I don't know. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, the thing about them is, my whole thing is like, out of the masses, get to the movement, or I'm sorry, out of the movement, get to the masses. Their whole thing was kind of like their whole existence was to criticize the movement, right? And they were known, they go to other people's events, they disrupt. Some of their positions are pretty wild. They're for the legalization of pedophilia, for example. That's pretty ridiculous. They take some pretty wild positions. World War II, they support is still going on. I've heard them argue. Roman Polanski, they support Roman Polanski, and I don't know. They're ultra left. I mean, and I don't know. That's all there is to it. Yeah. So, and I see somebody with a Spartacus symbol, if 4 is in there in the chat. But yeah, I mean, it's ortho Trotskyism. That's what they're known for. And they're rather angry to deal with. They're kind of hard to talk to. If you see them on the street, you try to see them selling their paper and talk to them. They're not pleasant to interact with. They get very fired up. I never talked about the Pope, did I? I'm so sorry for that. Let me answer that question about the Pope's environmentalism. That was a super chat I never got to. All right, so Pope Francis, right? He's talking a lot about global warming, and he's talking a lot about criticizing capitalism. And there's a reason for that, which is that the Catholic Church tends to follow European capital. And, what the German bourgeoisie are doing, what the French bourgeoisie are doing, that's what the Catholic Church does. The Catholic Church in the 50s was in an anti-communist frenzy. Starting in the 60s, it started being critical of the Vietnam War and such, right? In the 80s, it was really into color revolutions, but it was very critical of U.S. policy in Latin America. It follows European capital. And right now, it's very clear that the main oomph behind Greta Thunberg is the European Union. right? The Club of Rome, right, which is a think tank that was established, the Club of Rome. Um, yeah, I mean, it's that, and so it's not a surprise, right? And they're for more social democracy. They think that would make capitalism more stable. And the Pope, he's on this anti-communist, anti-capitalism. He's criticizing capitalism. He's for social programs, but he's not a Marxist. Definitely not a Marxist. He denounces Marxism. And from what I understand, Pope Francis, someone's saying that he was a Marxist. I understand that Pope Francis was heavily involved with the military juntas in Argentina that tortured Marxists, and that he worked closely with the military governments that were brutal and repressive, and that he had he was very, very involved in political repression in Argentina. Um, but there you go. I mean, from my understanding, he was definitely not a Marxist. But this is what European capital thinks. They think that there should be more of a welfare state, and they think there should be more, cuts in spending because of global warming. That seems to be the position of European capital, and that's basically what the Catholic Church does. And I wrote an article, I'm not sure where things stand now, but for a while it was pretty clear that Europe, I mean, Italy has signed the Belt and Road, right? And so have a number of European countries. They've joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and that, the Vatican and China were on good terms. Whereas the United States was having a trade war, and that it's European capital. That's basically the way the Vatican goes. But look, folks, it's late. People are complaining about bugs and stuff like that, and it's late, and I've been on here for a while. So I hope you enjoyed the chat. I hope I answered everyone's questions. Lincolnite Yankee says Evo Morales gave the Pope that hammer and sickle crucifix. He totally did. Fascinating, I think. I think I'm going to say goodnight. So remember, more than ever right now, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have continuously launched wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And thank you, Brent McKinney, for that super chat. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night. Good night.